All right, it's 7:30 and I call this meeting to order of the Concord Municipal Light Board. We're meeting again on Zoom this morning for Governor Baker's executive order suspending provisions of the open meeting law issued in March of this year. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Minuteman YouTube channel after the meeting at some point. So I'd like to suggest that I'd like to tweak the meeting format for this meeting and see how it works. And I'd like to hear objections before we decide to do that. But let me just see if I can pull up my notes a little better. Give me 1 second. Okay. I find it, I may not be as adept as Wendy is, but I find it difficult to both concentrate on the conversation, manage a meeting, while also watching the chat and the raised hand functions. Yep. It's sensory overload. And so I'd like to suggest that we try for at least this meeting and see if it works to eliminate the chat function and allow people to raise their hand when they want something to say. You can either raise it by hand or you could raise hand by going into the participants button. Click on the bottom where it says raise hand, and we'll try and keep an eye on the raised hand comments. Hopefully what I would like to try and do is ask for public comment at the end of each major section of our agenda, rather than making people wait to the very end of the meeting. And then there'll be an open comment period at the end for people who would like to say something that doesn't particularly relate to any one agenda item. Does that sound okay to all of you, or do you have concerns or suggestions?
I think that sounds good.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to manage all that information overload all at once. So. Yeah,
okay. So let's try that. If we see other people joining who may not know how to use the raised hand function, we'll just go through that again. I might be able to follow along, but I might not.
We do have 2 people with their hands raised.
We have 2 people with their hands up already. All right. Yeah. Okay, so we go into participants who has hands up. I see attendees. Okay. All right, let's see. Andy Perchik. Andy, did you have your hand raised for a question or comment?
Yes, I do. I'm sorry to interrupt, but while you're talking about the meeting, I would like to encourage you to use the Zoom function to encrypt the password in the URL link, so you don't have to do a separate adding the passcode in there. It's a easily done thing.
That's a good suggestion.
We purposely disabled that
right.
to add a security feature where someone had to actually add in the password. So that was
what is the point in the agenda? You have the link and then you have the passcode. So how secure is that? The second, all you're doing is making it more difficult for people to attend the meeting. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll let Dave think about that afterwards, because that's something out of my pay grade here on how to manage the internal workings of Zoom. Carlin Reed also has a comment.
Hi, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. I like your process, Alice. Go forward, conquer. That's great.
Okay, thank you. If it doesn't work, we'll change it for the next meeting. So for all those who have called in, are you all familiar with how to use the raise hand function of chat? I mean of Zoom. You go into the participants button at the bottom of your screen. When your name comes up, at the very bottom of that participant list, there should be a raise hand button. And we'll try and keep an eye out for all raised hands, and definitely I'll look at the raised hands at the end of each conversation when there's time for public comment. So I think that is it for my morning thoughts. So let's get into the meat of the meeting. We'll start with just reminding us that we currently have our next meeting scheduled for December 9th. And it's currently scheduled for 7:30 in the morning. And we might have another meeting in December that is strictly a budget meeting. So put those on your calendar for now. There may be some changes coming in terms of the time or date. Yeah, Brian.
Question. So I know there's a request from CAB to have Dave and Laura come speak about clean energy. I think it would be good for this board to have a joint meeting with CAB to go over our Concord's clean energy strategy so that we all can participate in that meeting. As we're talking about schedules, I wanted to bring that up because I believe the suggested date is the 13th of December.
Well, we're having a conversation about that today. It's on our agenda for our public supply goals, our power supply goals. So that looks like clean energy
That's
and
under
where
the
we
power
are.
supply goals. Okay.
So let's see
We'll
how
go-
our
let's circle
conversation
back.
goes. They perhaps could watch that on YouTube, or we could do a redux. Well, let's see how today's conversation goes. We have minutes to approve for September, and are we ready to approve October as well, Wendy? Do you have everybody's
Yes, I
comments?
think we are. Yep.
Okay, so we have minutes for September and October. Do I have a motion for the minutes? Brian?
I'm going to move that we approve the minutes from October. And sorry, I was half prepared. I was going to say that I wasn't here for one meeting, but I was for the other. So I'd like to do them separately and not jointly.
Okay, excellent.
And then I
So-
tried to skip to the motion and I just got stuck.
Right, when I looked at you with your raised hand, I was thinking you may not have been here for the September meeting, so you wouldn't be able to comment or vote on those. So let's take a vote. Do we have a motion? We have a motion to approve the October minutes. Second?
Second,
Okay, this requires a roll call vote. Gordon?
Aye.
Brian, you're abstaining.
Yeah.
Wendy?
Oh, no, for October, I'm.
Oh, October, Brian's here.
Yep. And
Okay.
yes, I approve.
Okay, Wendy?
approve.
And Alice, approve. Is Pam on this meeting right now? Did anybody?
I don't see her.
I do not see Pam. I wonder if I should send a text and just make sure she's going to join us.
Good
She was
idea.
on her Pam Hill. Let's see. Are you joining the?
Alice, while you're doing that, you had said that you were thinking of on the agenda to put something like what CAB does with the background and purpose. For the next agenda, do you think you'd be able to do that?
What I said I would do is have organization to these meetings. And so when we get to each one of these items, we will have whether we are having a discussion or whether we're having a vote on something so that we know what the outcome of that particular agenda item is. You'll see it in the column on the far right.
Yes, but just as I didn't know that under power supply goals was the discussion of the CAB meeting, it would be good to get a little bit more detail on the agenda about what we're talking about under those topics.
I don't believe the power supply goals agenda item had anything to do with the CAB meeting, because that was not something I was aware of was being asked, but it is a discussion about our power supply and our goals, where we are in reaching our goals. So you're asking for a broader agenda so that you have a more specific understanding of what the conversation will be about at the meeting. Is that what
Yes,
you're saying?
thank you.
Okay. We'll take note of that. Thank you.
Thanks.
So now we also have approval of the minutes for September. Do I have
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of September 9th, 2020 as written.
Okay, do I have a second? Gordon?
Seconded.
Thank you. Roll call vote to approve. Gordon?
Aye.
Wendy?
Approve.
And I also approve.
And
So we now have,
you can just mark that I abstained. That
And
way
one
in the
abstain for
minutes it
Brian.
Says that I abstained.
Yep.
for no reason.
okay, so we now have minutes approved for September and October. Wendy, that was record speed. I don't know how you did that. Thank you.
Well, I think the board has made would like to get the minutes up to date and approved each month. So I'm going to try to stick to that. And it's probably worth noting that Gordon's going to be acting clerk today.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
Yeah,
Does it-
so I'm taking notes, and it'd be helpful. Oh, by the way, I never recorded this. Do I record it?
No, Dave does, and it is recording.
Yep.
Okay.
It is recording.
All right.
Okay.
So anyway, usual thing, but I'd like to get it done quickly.
Gordon,
Okay.
I can share the recording with you on Google Drive if that's helpful. Just let me know.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
Pam
Karen-
says she has joined us.
Yep.
I do not see Pam.
She's coming in now.
Under
Okay.
attendees.
There she is. Okay. Pam, are you able to turn your video on?
Yeah, I am. I'm
Great.
sorry, I couldn't find the login material, so my apologies for being late.
Okay, thank you for joining us.
All right.
So the next item on our agenda is the director's update, and I'll turn to Dave for telling us what's happened in the last month and to follow up on the open items from last month.
All right. So in terms of COVID, we're still operating in split groups. Office is running about 40% staff during the day. People are working from home. Obviously, I'm at home today. So that's kind of where we are with that. We don't see any change coming on that anytime soon, based on numbers. See Stevens joining us here. You guys will see that Jason Bulger is on the screen. Jason is the new CIO for the town of Concord. He started on Monday. I'm probably the most excited person with us. And so I just wanted to introduce him so that you guys could see him. And Jason, if you want to say a word, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself to everyone, and I'll stick around for the meeting and hear what you guys are working on now. But I just want to thank Stephen and Dave. They've done a great job with the vacancy lasting this long. And I'm just really excited to get to know everyone and see how I can help Concord. So if there's anything you need, let Dave know, and it'll be on my radar.
Right. Welcome.
aboard.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Okay, so last week we launched our kickoff meeting with our third-party call center for after-hours calls for outages. We'll be working with CRC and expect the call center to be fully populated and launched by the end of December. So we're excited about that. There's a bunch of background work that needs to be done in terms of tying it in with our databases and things of that nature. So, hopefully before it snowfalls, that'll be launched. It looks like it will be. So we're excited about that. Next week is our annual inventory week. So the crews will be conducting the count of stock on hand. Currently in the system, we show about $1.3 million of stock in the warehouse. So it's a pretty important thing to do annually. When we do that, the guys, they don't go out in the field unless it's an emergency. So, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, they'll be conducting that. 2021 budget cycle obviously is started. I think important to note that we'll schedule a special meeting in December like we generally do for the budget. So we'll be polling the board on availability for that special meeting. The meeting can be in the morning like this one is, or it can be in the afternoon or evening. So we'll get that going probably next week in terms of availability. The MIRFP for a consultant that was issued on November 12th. The pre-proposal meeting is scheduled for December 1st. The questions are due to us by December 10th. And then we've said that we'd get responses back to the consultants that are sending the proposals in by December 17th. And the proposals are due on January 7th. So making some progress there. 69 people attended our virtual roundtable for car buyers. on October 20th and 24th, and got answers to questions they submitted in advance or asked live questions during the event. 120 people who had signed up for the event requested and received a copy of Car Electric Insider magazine, along with information on CMLP's EV specialist and charging rebates. So that was a good event. Through a subcontract with Energy New England, Abode Energy Management is now providing heat pump specialist services to CMLP customers. Our customers can call Abode's heat pump specialist with any questions they have about purchasing and using heat pumps for home space and water heating. Abode also will be hiring 2 paid part-time heat pump coaches on CMLP's behalf, supported by a grant received from American Public Power Association through their DEED program. The coaches will work up to 50 hours per month with Concord homeowners to coach them through the process of selecting among multiple heat pump options. The coaches will receive in-depth training and ongoing mentoring from Abode's heat pump specialist. We encourage Concord residents who are interested in doing this work to review the job description and submit their applications at abode.com/careers by December 1st. And that's my update. Any questions?
Any questions from the board? I don't see any hands. I have 2 small questions for you, please, Dave.
Yep.
Can you just, it's just because I'm ignorant on this subject. When you do the annual inventory, what is it that you have $1.3 million worth in stock of?
Heaters.
A lot of things. That includes wire, terminations, everything. It doesn't include our spare transformers that we have for failures. Those aren't included in that, but given the underground system that we have in the overhead system, we have to carry stock for projects and failures for both the underground and overhead. So it's generally ranged from 1 million to 1.3 million on hand. And if we have a big project, we generally stock up for that. Like say we have an underground project, we'd go out and buy additional conduit on top of what we have in hand. So the answer in short is it's many items.
Yeah, okay.
If I gave you guys a tour of the warehouse, you'd see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's basically like a warehouse, a hardware store of all your materials and supplies that you need to keep running.
Yes.
Okay. You have a question, Brian?
Yeah, so the recycled copper, is that accumulating and is because I remember when that was stolen way back when, is that part of the inventory process to make sure that those get recycled before they get to large stockpiles and large amounts?
So the scrap copper is monitored weekly. I'm not going to get into the details of that because, I don't want to go through the details with the public on that, but it's monitored weekly and it is recycled throughout the year. If that is,
You're on top of it, that's all.
yeah.
Great.
Okay. So I'm wondering about 2 other items that you mentioned. The EV buyers participation rate was great. Do we have any way of measuring whether any of those 120 people that signed up and went to the EV roundtable are actually buying or have bought an EV as a result? It's always good to know whether our efforts are producing returns. And I'm wondering whether we have any way to measure that.
I know Jan keeps a close eye on that. I don't have that information at my fingertips, but the interest alone is very positive.
That's half the equation. The other half is making the next leap to put in the infrastructure.
One of the things that, I look at is, how many EVs do we have now? And we're certainly, doing well in terms of comparison to other MLPs in terms of adoption. But, we still have, there's only like 450 throughout the whole town. So it's still something we need to continually promote and work on. And we recognize that.
It'd be great just to know that our efforts, which of our efforts are actually it having an impact on turning people over to purchasing the EV.
Yeah.
And a similar question for the abode energy coaches. Will abode wait until a customer calls them, or do we have a strategy for acquiring a customer to persuade at this time because the heating system is old or the heating system is oil? Do we have a way of identifying potential customers and then turning them into an active client?
Yeah, I think that's something that we're working on. You know, we need to market it a little bit more. We have had decent adoption, but again, not quite where we were hoping it to be. And I think these heat pump coaches can help with that.
In order to get to scale, we have to really think big, and it can't be waiting for somebody to call us with a question about a heat pump. If we want it to happen, we have to aggressively go out and market it and, you know, establish a customer acquisition program. So I would suggest if we're really serious about getting a heat pump adoption, that we look at full scale marketing and look at our rebate schedules for it as well.
I agree.
We also talked briefly last time about battery storage. Was there any moving forward on battery storage?
So battery storage, we'll have an update at the next meeting. We just need time to, you know,
Great.
work on that. We got a lot of things going on. That's one of them. But-
Okay. So I'll put it on my thing, on my notes here for next week or next month. Battery storage, December. Okay. All right. If there are no more questions, let's see, I see no raised hands. Okay, the next discussion, yeah.
Sorry. So Dave, with the heat pumps, with Alice's idea of creating a strategy to promote heat pumps, I know that we had the EV working group, and that worked well for making a strategy behind electric vehicle adoption. Is it possible that something like that could be done? It was a good, it used people from CSECT, people at the light plant to really kind of create a good framework for advocating.
Yeah, it's certainly something that we want to look at. I think one of the things we need to keep in mind is when we launched the heat pump programs and the EV program got more focus. And, you know, now that, you know, we're bringing heat pump coaches on and, you know, using abodes specialists, that's going to help. But I think it's something that we certainly can look at, Brian.
Great. All right, the next discussion on the agenda is our fund balance policy.
Alice, we do have a hand up.
Oh, we do. Okay, thank you. Pamela? Pamela, are you there? Oh, I think, did we just drop her?
Are
There,
you talking to me?
sorry.
No, Pamela had a comment. She had her hand raised.
Okay.
In
but-
terms of adopting heat pump and so on technology, we're having a new building being built on the Harold Street, Commonwealth Avenue. And the builder has beautiful outside and so on. But the inside, he's switching architects, and I think we should urge him. We have urged him to go electric instead of fossil fuel, but it would help if he had some contractor style and information and resources available. Can somebody contact him for that?
Interesting comment. I didn't know about that building.
It
see.
was in the Zoning Board of Appeals and the West Concord Advisory Committee. It's connected to the large, my memory isn't as good as it should be.
So I
But
think the point that you're making is that we ought to be working with developers or
Yes,
when projects are coming to the boards to encourage electrification.
yes, because especially with the economics of it, old style developers don't know that it's cheaper. And particularly, this would be a good opportunity because I don't intend to sell, they're going to rent.
Mhm.
So
That's an
they will
inter-
actually get the benefit.
Mhm. Okay, so I think I hear the suggestion, and we should keep that in mind, that we should create some sort of mechanism for informing our builders when they come before our boards that we prefer and encourage electrification and can provide benefits for that.
And give them resources to help them.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Okay.
I think
let's-
Stephen wants to talk.
How come I don't see Steve? Oh, there's his hand. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's because I was late. I apologize. I think, especially on that project, I think Kate Hanley sits in on our design review team. And so she usually, and I've been in a few of those, and she usually does do a good job of, guiding developers on sustainable options for heating and cooling and things like that. That's her specific role on the team. So I'm pretty sure that happened on that ComAF project. But our DPLM is aware of the town's priorities, and every time I've seen them work with developers, I think they've encouraged some more sustainable options.
Great, good to hear. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the discussion of our fund balance policy. Everyone should have received a copy of this in their packet late last week. This is a policy that was in the making for the better part of a year. It's a discussion of the board, and this is the final version. And I thought it was a good time for us to review what was in this, because as we come up to our budget season, we need to understand the items in the budget and where our funds are. So Dave, would you like to lead us through a discussion of the fund balance policy? And
Sure.
probably Wendy too. She's led this effort with us.
So Matt's going to kind of review the policy that was adopted. Matt, do you need to share your screen?
Sure.
This item is for discussion only. It's already been approved, but it's a discussion so that all board members are up to speed on what the fund balance policies are as we move into our budget season.
Okay, good morning. I am Matt Cummings, the financial manager at the light plant. So I've got the fund balance policy pulled up on my screen, but I also have cash balances if you wanted to check. I didn't know what the intent of the review was, but so if we want to review financial stuff, we can do that as well.
Well, let's start with the policy, then we can decide if we have time to look at the actual numbers and the counts.
So the first couple of pages are kind of just background and purpose of the policy. So I wasn't going to get too much into those. If you scroll down to page 3 is where we start getting into the meat of the policy, where we start actually putting conditions on each cash account. The first one we had was the Depreciation Fund. This is whenever we have $1 for depreciation expense, we put $1, we set aside $1 from our operating cash into this account. And the restriction that we placed on this one was that we kept this between $1 million and $6 million. So, and those monies then get spent on capital projects, and mainly infrastructure.
So that's a very wide range. That's a $5 million range in what we would maintain in a fund balance. What determines how much money in a given year that we are trying to put aside? The amount of our depreciation, but it seems like that would be a more constant than having a $5 million range.
It's pretty constant, and I think the reason for the range was that this fund will build up and then we'll spend it down. We didn't want to limit ourselves, because if we didn't have a huge capital project in our in the near future, this fund could grow to a pretty good amount, but we typically have been good at keeping this fairly low.
I also think that important thing to add is, when we do a capital project, we can deplete, $2 or $3 million pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really why the range is where it is. We never want the depreciation fund to go below $1 million. That happened one time years ago, and it gets a little bit uneasy. So the lower end of 1 million is really a low end. you know, 6 million is the high end, but we've got up there a couple times and then drew it down pretty significantly, pretty quickly.
And what is our current balance in the depreciation fund?
So this is, I'm just going to explain the chart. The first column is the division. So we separate electric from telecom. The first account is the depreciation fund. And then I've got balances for this is the audited balance. And then this is the June 30 balance, you know, obviously more recent. So the June 30 balance, we're at 4.5 million. However, this fund owes a little bit back to the operating fund right now. So I would say somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million is owed to the operating fund.
Okay. Wendy, I'm going to rely on you to, you know, as a financial person who led this conversation over the last year. I think I was such a newbie listening to the conversation that I didn't add much intellect to the conversation. So I rely on you.
The only comment I'd make is that we do have an annual budget allocation to the depreciation fund at 3%. And so, as Matt said, it accumulates until such time as we start spending it. So I think the board is fine with this approach.
Yeah, and to add to what Wendy said, the 3% is mandated from the state. If we wanted to change that amount, we could request that. And, you know, my understanding is they're generally accepting of the change if need be. We've never really had to do that, but it is 3% by state guidelines.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, emergency repairs fund.
Yep, moving on to the emergency repairs fund. This is essentially a rainy day fund for us. We did kind of, when we put the policy together or approved the policy, we did kind of restrict the uses of the funds. It's not just an operating reserve, it's more of a catastrophic infrastructure. It's going to be used for infrastructure essentially if we had, you know, a tornado or something like of that nature to come through.
Okay.
And the restriction we put was it's needs to be between $1 million and $1.5 million. We are currently, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that was based on experience as well, if I recall, right, Dave?
Yeah, we built that fund back in 2006 at $1 million. The reason why we added it as a range is just because it's collecting interest.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did we use that fund during that recent outage?
No, we didn't.
This fund hasn't been touched since it was instituted, I believe.
Oh, okay. So it's our insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Debt service.
Debt service. This one's more or less just, we just kind of set cash aside each month so that we are able to make our debt payments. There isn't really a restriction on this. It's just any funds that need to be spent on debt will go into a fund and we pay it down as required. Or actually the town takes care of that and we pay them back.
Yep. Okay. So there's no goal in this. There's no percentage of asset or a goal that we try to maintain in the fund. We do an assessment on what our debt obligations are for a given year and maintain that.
Yeah, all of our debt instruments are very structured. We know exactly what we're going to pay. You know, I know what we're going to pay in 2029 unless we add new debt. So
okay,
it's pretty easy to estimate what we need to put aside each month.
Okay. Okay.
Now this one, the policy supply reserve, I'm not an expert on. This isn't a cash account. This is a liability. And I think it's called a PCA credit that I believe what it is we take the difference between the cost of power and what we've budgeted in rates for the cost of power. And wherever it ends up, it either adds to the liability or decreases the liability. And I believe with the, probably talk about it in the future, but with the cost of service study, we're planning on setting our rates so that it is going to draw this liability down so we don't have to increase our rates as much. But
For those who want to know, PCA stands for Power Cost Adjustment,
sorry.
and it's exactly as it's described by Matthew.
and
I
we-
could
oh, go ahead.
dumb that down a little bit if anybody needs it.
Always. So
Okay,
please.
so the power cost adjustment, it's another word for it is provision for rate refund. And basically, the light plant doesn't make any money on the supply of power. Whatever we pay for power is exactly what we charge customers, but that varies over time. So we keep track of how much of your rate we are charging you and saying is for power and what we actually pay. And so if we pay less than what we are charging you in rates, we put that as a liability out on our balance sheet because we're going to return that to customers. Likewise, if what we charge you in rates, we end up having to pay more for power, eventually we're going to collect that from customers and we keep that in this account. So over the last 3 or 4 years, we've paid less for power than what was in rates. And so we're going to be returning that money when we make the rate change on January 1st. The rate change would have been slightly larger had we not had this money that's owed to customers that we're using to reduce the rate slightly.
Great. Thank you for dumbing that down for me and perhaps others as well. Okay, now the Renewable Energy Credits Fund.
So this is where we, so each month we're charging we were charging a penny per kilowatt. Now it's a penny and a half per kilowatt hour. Sorry, Laura. This fund is where we accumulate those funds until we actually buy the REC. So,
Yep. Yep, and we just voted to raise that to by 0.5%, a penny. So that we had sufficient funds to buy RECs.
Yep. I don't think we put any restriction on the account other than we just explained we determined what it could be used for.
Okay.
So can I just comment? One thing was it didn't have to be just for the RECs. There was an opportunity to use it for the purchase of additional costs for green energy as well, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you for the clarification, Wendy. It's right there in black and white in the policy, so thank you. The underground fund.
So the underground fund, we set aside dollars for that can only be used for underground fund, or excuse me, adding new underground to the system. The rate is 1.5% of total charges on each bill. So it's just a line item on your bill that we set aside, and we eventually I think we're going to draw a little bit of that down with the what's the big project going on right now?
The Cambridge Turnpike.
Cambridge Turnpike.
And then in the future, we had planned on using some of this funds to complete some projects we had started. We put the conduit in the ground, but now we're going to actually electrify it.
And just to add to that, so we currently, have the surcharge at 1.5%. Per Mass General Law, Chapter 166, that can be 2%, but we changed that back in 2009 to 1.5%. And that's when we created the CARES Fund. So
Okay.
if you're looking at the general laws, the reason why we're not at 2% is because of that.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
And we are currently at 2.3 million, almost 2.4, although a little of this is owed back to the operating. Once we capitalize that Cambridge Turnpike project, some of that money will be transferred to the operating fund.
And if I recall, it cost approximately $1 million a mile for undergrounding. Is that right?
Yes.
So we may have as much as 1.5 miles worth of funds available.
Well, one of the things that I always mention when we talk about this is, we collect about roughly 400,000 a year in underground surcharges. Takes about 3 years to get enough money to do 1 mile. We have about 3 miles of conduit in the ground, so there's a backlog. So, you know, expectations of, you know, expediting that would have to be done in a different way. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
Okay, thank you. And the last fund is our unrestricted funds. And what can you tell us about those so we have background information, Matt?
So this is probably the reason why we have this policy. I think we wanted to make sure that we weren't keeping too much funds on hand, unrestricted cash on hand. And so we decided, I think we decided to go with between 2 and 3 months of total expenses on hand at any one time. And this is really just our excess cash that comes in, our essentially our profit ends up in this fund right here. And I'll pull up the, so we need to make sure we include both telecom and electric. We are currently looking pretty low, although, as I said, this is probably about $1 million below what it should be. And then we are going to talk about this later, the negative telecom balance.
Yep.
But Matt, at the year end, the audited statements, that 6 million is in line with this policy. So from a ratepayer perspective, I think a couple of years ago, there was a much larger amount of funds there. So I think the concern was, why are we increasing rates if in fact we have actually an accumulated balance? And so I think what I see in these numbers is that that's no longer the case, that we have a fund that is in line with our policy and we haven't over accumulated operating cash based on the annual statement. I don't know about the current balance.
No, Wendy, you're right.
Right.
Okay.
And I'll point out that we're probably quite a bit below where we should be as of June 30th right now. So, and you'll kind of see that highlighted in the financial statements when we go over the next topic.
Okay.
We're hoping that the cost of service study will alleviate our reduction in cash a little bit.
Right. Hopefully you can walk us through. All right, so I'm going to suggest that all board members keep a copy of the fund balance policy in hand. I have a budget book that helps me just organize my thinking as we come around to the budget year. And that this is a really good guidance tool for us as we review what's coming before us in the budget each year. So I put it in my notebook, keep it as our reference guide to what those accounts are and what our goals are in each one of them. The next, any questions on fund balance? Yeah, Pam.
And this is because I'm new and I just want to dispose of the question right away. It's just to get a sense or an understanding of our relationship with Energy New England. And I guess my question basically is, are all municipally owned plants a member of this? Are there competing resources? And I ask this question simply because in the introduction, it says that this is the electric power consortium of which the light plant is a member and are guided by ENE's recommendations. So Alice, I'm not sure you want to do this anytime soon, but I would like to know a little bit more about this. I did Google it and I see there are a large number of organizations in it, but at some point, given its primacy in terms of how its relationship to CMLP, I'd like to have an understanding, a better understanding of it.
Okay, so let's put that on as a future discussion about ENE and what they do for municipal light plants and our relationship with them. Dave is probably in the best position to talk about that in a meeting. You agree that it's better to defer that to another meeting, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, in short, we're an equity owner of ENE, CMLP is, so we could have them come and explain all the stuff they do for us. But, you know, that's a longer conversation. So I think, you know, it should be a topic for another meeting.
Okay.
And then having raised it, Alice, just to say, I don't want to unnecessarily waste time. So if it's your judgment that this is something that need not be discussed at all, and that I should rely on Google, I'll do that, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll figure out the best approach. Thank you.
Pamela,
wanted
I can set up a meeting with you to kind of go through that too, if it would be helpful.
Yeah, whatever you guys think is right.
Yeah,
I think it would be helpful for the board to do this, to do a review of E&E and our relationship. I think it would be good to do it publicly.
Well, I guess I would look at it as, from what I've observed, E&E is a really great organization, does a lot for us, and a chance for the board and the public to hear the many positive ways they serve CMLP would be probably a good discussion.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Pam. All right, the next item on the agenda is a 2019 budget review. And I'm going to let Dave or Matt handle this conversation for us. You should have also received a copy of the budget review in your packet.
So Matt's going to kind of go through the 2019 audited financials with the board on a high level. And if you have questions, certainly ask them. You know, the intent here is not to get down into the weeds, but really high level overview.
So I'll go through it like Dave said at a high level. I'm going to kind of explain some of the pieces of each section of the financial statement. I'm not going to hit on all of them, but we'll kind of go a little bit deeper into the actual financials once we get there. So please stop me if you have any questions, or we can wait till the end. I'm going to scroll down to the first page, which is the auditor's report. It kind of more or less outlines what they did during the audit, and also explains the responsibilities of each party, meaning them and us. The one point the one area I want you to check is on page 2 is the opinion section, and this is what they would refer to as a clean opinion. We didn't have anything that would make them doubt our numbers. So, and then down to page 4 is the start of the management discussion and analysis. This is kind of a narrative of the financial activity for the light plant. If you're looking for something to do, this is a good place to start because it goes through it kind of does a high level review of the financial statements for everyone. It is a lot easier to follow than the actual financial statements if you're not aware of all the ins and outs. Down to page 8 is where the actual financial statements start. The first statement is the consolidated statement of net position. I'm going to kind of go through some of these balances that stood out to me when I was reviewing it. The first one we just kind of talked about, the unrestricted cash has decreased by over $1 million. And this is kind of what you're going to see is we're based on the power supply being, we've had very low weather years, as Laura would put it. They've been very mild, so we usually make more money when it's stronger weather, hotter in the summer, colder in the winter. So since we've had mild years, it's kind of brought our cash balances down, unrestricted cash balances down. The next item I was going to point out is the restricted cash. This went down just a little bit. I just wanted to point it out based on our prior discussion. We've stayed pretty level in that area. Capital assets, these 4 numbers here. Oh, I should explain, sorry. This is the 2019 numbers compared to the 2018 numbers. So that's what the 2 columns are. The fixed assets or capital assets have gone up about 800,000, which is mostly due to infrastructure additions that we've added. Let's see. Accounts payable went up quite a bit, $500,000. This is due to just timing of a few of the energy bills that came in at year end that didn't get paid as timely.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Can you just speak to the deferred outflows? Because there's a big increase there related to pensions. So people are aware of it.
Yes. So I'm not an expert on these So there was 2 GASBs that came out recently, and they changed the way we account for pensions in OPEB. The OPEB being the other post-employment benefits, which is essentially the health care that retirees receive after they've left the town. What this number represents is that when the actuaries do their studies, they do make a lot of estimates. And then when the actual data starts coming in versus those estimates, things are off. So that we plug that number here as essentially something that we're going to spend later in the next few years. We'll spend that down. What you'll also see here is there's a liability for net pension liability, and that also has gone up. So the net effect on the income statement is, or excuse me, the balance sheet is, there wasn't much of a change. It's just now we've got bigger numbers on both the top and the bottom.
Thank you.
I think the change was that we are now required to show our OPEB liabilities as a liability on the balance sheet, which we hadn't had to do before.
Correct.
But this is related to pension, so it's a timing issue and a methodology.
Good
It's
point.
different than right?
Right.
And I think part of it could be that I think we do the actuarials every other year. So there's a lot that can happen in between when that study comes out and when we get to our audit.
Yep.
So that's all I had on that statement. The next statement is essentially the income statement, but it's called the Consolidated Statement of Revenues, Expenses, and Changes in that position. You'll see electric sales went down a bit by about 300,000.
Gordon, you had a question?
I was just curious on the previous page, Matt, and you mentioned that energy expenditures went up. Would rec expenditures be a part of that?
Yes.
Potentially, yeah. And there's a topic that I've been just concerned about or interested in, the fact that we sometimes buy recs for 1 year in the following year. And so I don't know if it would help track our progress a little bit more easily if we made them concurrent. But do you have an opinion on that? Does it actually make a difference?
I think it will this year because we started collecting the rec funds in 2018, and then subsequently in 2019 is when we first purchased the recs. So it's going to look a little bit odd, but as we go forward, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference.
It should smooth out then. Okay. All right. Continue.
Thank you for the question. Okay.
So here is that the rec purchase surcharge. We collected 1.6 million in 2019 versus 2018. And again, the difference there is we started collecting in, I believe, September of 2018. So we only had a quarter of a year versus a full year. So this is a big one here, the rate refund. And this is a mix of the rate stabilization and also that PCA that we talked about in the previous topic. The rate stabilization didn't really affect this too much. The decrease here is almost fully due to that rate refund, which I wrote it down. The cost of power was less, generally in 2019, the cost of power was less than what we had in rates. So that drew down this revenue account versus the prior year.
Because that's good news.
Yeah.
Moving on to expenses, there was a decrease in the cost of power, but this is a little bit deceiving because this does include that rec purchase that Gordon was referring to. So the cost of power actually went down quite a bit more than that. Another thing to point out is salaries and benefits. We were a lot more fully staffed in 2019. So there was a pretty big increase in the salaries there. I believe this also includes the pension and OPEB expense. So that's part of this as well. And that's probably the bigger increase here. So this is a big reason why you'll see we're down here in net position, which is our essentially our net income. We actually lost money in 2019, and that's why our cash is coming down from the previous page. Any questions on this statement?
No, I don't think so. Any questions from the board? Okay. Next.
Next, I'm going to go down to page 11, which is the start of the notes to the financial statements. I'm not going to get into anything here. I just wanted to point out that this, if you saw a number on one of those financial statements that you wanted to know more about, this is where you'd come. Almost everything on those statements is described here. And if you would like to take a nap, the pension and OPEB section is a very good place to do that. It's almost half of the notes is made up of that. So there's a lot of info there if you are interested. And then skipping all the way down to page 36. Sorry. This we've had this in the financial statements for several years now. It breaks out the light plant versus the broadband fund for each year. So you'll see light fund and broadband fund. So if you wanted a little bit more detail from those previous financial statements, this has everything split out quite a bit. And then, so that's all I had on the financial statements. I did want to go over this, the management letter, to kind of discuss where we are with the findings that we received. So I'm going to skip down to the actual finding pages, which is page 3, I believe. Yeah. So the first one, we had a significant deficiency related to the cash reconciliations. We had kind of gotten behind. I don't really want to give out a bunch of excuses. To focus on the future, I just met with our software company yesterday, and we've kind of got a lot better grip on how to use our system for the cash reconciliation. So I'm going to actually work on that later today. And then we are also going to start sending them over to Town Hall for Mary Barrett to review and sign off, so that we comply with this. This finding will go away, I believe, next year.
So Matt, there was a comment about who's got the final authority on a balance issue. Who has that? Who's got the final say? Is it the town or the light plant? Because I think that's held us up, right, in some of this reconciliation.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the biggest problem is our bank is essentially the town's general ledger.
Yeah.
So we kind of have to rely on them to post things, and they're on cash basis, we're on accrual. So it just, everything gets kind of mixed up. And so we're trying to learn, and then toss in a brand new system. It just got kind of wonky. So we're progressing towards getting it really cleaned up.
So I'll just comment that this recommendation has been in the audited financials for like 4 years, and some of that was staffing, some of it's the billing system, and some of it's just process. And so I'm glad to hear that you're sort of getting it where it should be. I think it would be important for the board to know that this is in shape. So maybe, in 6 months we can touch base on how this has improved over time this year.
Okay.
Let's put that on. I'm keeping a conversation to-do list for upcoming meetings, and I'll make sure we put that on as well.
Okay. And then the second and last finding, we are actually going to take care of right after this topic, which is the agreement between broadband and light plant for essentially a loan agreement. So that will be resolved pretty quick, and that's related to the negative cash balance that we saw. I'll pull up this chart again. That's related to this negative cash. So we're going to transfer some cash over to the telecom fund and clear
Yeah,
up.
I think that's our next agenda item. So that requires a board vote.
Yep. So that's all I had on my presentation for the financial statements. Were there any questions?
Any questions from the board?
No, thank you. It's a good walkthrough.
Yeah, appreciate that.
If anyone has any questions that come up after the fact, just email me and Matt and I will respond.
And I do not see any questions from citizens on this one. Okay, that's great. All right, let's move on to our.
I do have one question, and that is just from the perspective of the clerk for this. What do you think the expectations are for how detailed and granular the minutes need to be? We just walked through a lot of very complicated numbers. Certainly taking handwritten notes, I didn't try to capture any of that. And I'm kind of thinking, I mean, I captured some key parts of that, but what's the sense of the board is in terms of how much detail we need to capture in these minutes?
I think you just need to put, in the minutes that we had a high-level overview of the 2019 audited financial statements. These are available for public view and go from there. I don't think you need to get too carried away.
Okay, thank you.
Except for the actions on the management letter are important, so those should be on record.
Yes.
Okay.
And that probably include that we have agreed that we will review the reconciliation reports in 6 months to see where we are meeting the management reviews recommendation.
Are the numbers themselves sensitive? If we've had actual pictures of the balances at various points in time, is that something that actually goes into the public record?
It's a public document.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Remember that our CMLP is publicly owned and all the
Yeah.
documents are public in terms of its, but not all documents, budget documents, not contract documents.
Right.
Okay.
All right. I see no other hands raised for comments or questions. So let's move on to the next agenda item, which is in line with this management review and our recent discussion on a payback policy for broadband. And this one is both a discussion of why it's on the agenda, and then this requires a board vote. Dave?
Yep. So Matt's got it up on the screen here. We put together this policy, as a recommendation from the auditor. It essentially details, about $1.9 million that we've used out of the light plant cash to fund telecom. And we did this specifically because, we had the money, and rather than going out and doing more and more borrowings, we knew that broadband was getting towards a cash positive piece. And now that we are there, we can set up this policy so that the electric funds are replenished from broadband over a period of time. We didn't want to do anything too drastic and put the telecom in the bad position. So I think what we did here was over a period of time, and I'll let Matt speak briefly to the period of time that's in this thing, but I think it's pretty straightforward, and then we'll take questions.
Yeah, so this was obviously born out of the auditors requested us to do this. So we're kind of just complying with their wishes. As we saw earlier, we've got a negative cash balance in the telecom area. And they've essentially operated as kind of a line of credit in my mind, as they spend and use cash that they just are essentially using electric cash to operate. So what I'm proposing is a 1.9 million transfer to the telecom fund or area to cover their deficit, and then they would have a payback over several, 12 years to pay that back. And it here's it as follows. And obviously this can be amended later if they're not in the position where they can make these payments, but I believe that they will.
I think the important thing is to have a structure around it. We were going to do this anyway without the auditors requesting it. It was just a when. And, now we're in a better position with revenues to start that. And I think what you're seeing here is a small start and then kind of work your way into it. This way we don't break the bank of a startup broadband business.
And what year is broadband expected to start turning a profit? Is it 2022, which is why we're starting this payback schedule in 2022? That's the first positive cash flow?
I believe that, well, according to the audit, they are already profitable
Okay.
in 2019. And I believe they're also cash flow positive at this point too.
Okay. Can I ask one question? I didn't understand one line in the background, and I just want to make sure that somebody can explain it to me. It says that in order for this agreement to go through, it says the light plant is to formalize the loan and transfer cash to the telecom enterprise in the amount of the loan. So explain to me why electric would be providing 1.9 million in loan to telecom for telecom to then repay to us if it's already been borrowed and spent. Is that a typo? Am I missing something in accounting?
I had the exact same question, Alice.
Okay.
So technically they haven't been loaned any cash. They just have gone into a deficit balance. So this would act as a loan. So we would actually give them the 1.9 million in cash now versus them just running a deficit cash balance.
I thought they already owed the electric side 1.9 million, not in forthcoming expenditures, but it's what was the startup cost and cost to date. And that accumulated to a $1.9 million borrowing that's already happened from the light plant, from the electric side.
It got balanced out on the balance sheet. So we didn't formally transfer from one fund to another. That's what this is saying we're doing, is transferring it over there. So that 1.9 million won't be a negative anymore. So we just haven't formally done it, but it works its way out in the balance piece.
Right, it's from an accounting purpose, right? You want to account for
Yeah.
where those assets and liabilities truly belong between
Correct.
the light plant and telecom.
That's correct.
So it's just for accounting purposes that it says this. Nothing changes. We're not loaning them an additional 1.9 million. It's still
Right.
on the payback, but we're showing it on the balance sheet as a loan that they received and therefore paying back their obligation to the electric side.
Yes,
Right.
and then through the revenues they collect, they'll pay that money back over a period of time.
And so
But there's no interest on it, right? So it's sort of.
Right, and that was the primary purpose to doing it this way,
Right.
opposed to doing a borrowing.
Right.
And so from year to year on the balance sheet for the for the telecom side, we should see that number dropping by $75,000 in 2022 and so forth.
Yep.
Right, liabilities and assets, yep.
Okay, I understand. So
you.
the vote of the board is to approve the payback schedule, the loan payback schedule, and to adjust the accounting procedures so that we're actually showing the loans on the balance sheet appropriately as a loan to telecom that's being repaid in the form of a debt repayment schedule. Do I have that right?
As clerk, I need to move more slowly. I don't write very fast. So the motion, the board moves to approve a loan described in this document that would account for the ongoing negative balances and create a payment for a schedule for repayment. Does that sound right?
So,
Are you making the motion?
no, I
I'm
was gonna
trying
say,
to,
make
I
a
can't, I
motion.
gotta have, yeah, I am, bear with me.
Okay, no, I'm just trying to understand where, in the
Oh,
process.
and just by the way, from a procedural point of view, it helps the clerk a lot if we can come into the meeting with draft motions for something complex like this. If anybody could write it down and distribute it, get it into the agenda maybe, or whatever.
That's a
So
good
that we
point.
don't, yeah, so we don't have to, a word craft on the fly. I find it very difficult.
I think you can just, for the motion, you can reference the policy.
Right.
Everything's in the
Correct.
policy. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Okay, so the motion could be, the board moves to endorse the policy as described in the document.
So Gordon, can I make a motion to approve the telecom startup payback policy as drafted and distributed to the board?
That's probably clear.
Someone would have to second that, of course.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Before you vote, Carlin does have her hand up.
Okay. Carlin?
Hi, Carlin Reed, just a question. How much will this raise broadband subscribers' fees?
It's not intended to raise fees at all. And so we purposely waited to put this together until we knew they were revenue positive. And we've known that we had to do this for a number of years, and we just held off on doing it. So it won't raise.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, and then just to read it again, the board moves to approve the telecom policy as drafted and distributed to the board. Did I catch
Yeah,
that
I would
right?
just be specific. It's the telecom startup payback policy.
Policy number 2020-02.
Okay. The board approves the telecom startup payback policy dash 2020-02 as drafted and distributed to the board.
Great.
Do I have a second? Brian?
Yep, second.
Okay. A vote of the board requires a roll call vote. We'll start with Wendy,
Approve.
Gordon,
Approved.
Pam, Hill.
I'm going to abstain simply because I just don't know enough yet about all of this, but I'm sure I would approve.
Okay, one abstention. Brian
Approve.
and Alice, I approve. So that's 4 approve, 1 abstention, and we now have a telecom startup payback policy approved.
Great.
Thank you. I might suggest, I printed out a copy of that. You might also want to put that in your budget book as we come looking at this from year to year to be able to remind ourselves what we voted on and to see if our balance sheet matches what we thought we approved at this meeting. Thank you. The next is a general discussion of our power supply, and this looking at what is our current power sources, what are our current power sources, and what is our current renewable energy rate in our power supply. And I think this is a discussion that Dave and maybe Laura will lead. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll take it on. I'm going to try and be somewhat brief to save time. We're a little bit behind.
Yep.
But really the idea is to give you an idea on where we are with our power supply. I'm going to put this up on the screen. This probably walk us through it pretty quickly. You can see the yellow is the solar, so 8% of the power supply is coming from solar. 10% is coming from wind, 16% from hydro. We have the landfill, which is a small piece there. And currently we have 26% from nuclear. And then you can see this other shading here. This is potential future. We have an option in front of us for more nuclear going out further, out to 2035. This just came to us last week, so we have to make a decision pretty soon on it. But and then the gray is the market. I think the piece here is, you can see we're going from about 30% up to, around, 60% or so. So we're making progress towards renewable contracts. In addition, we are continuing to buy RECs. And the goal obviously is to have a carbon-free power supply. That hasn't changed. And we're trying to figure out the most efficient way to do that. As the board knows, the REC prices have increased over the last year and a half. So, that's made it more challenging, but the encouraging piece for us is working with Energy New England. We've been finding we've been finding opportunities for more renewable contracts that we would get the RECs and retire them. So we're moving in the right direction. I think Laura's done a great job with this graph. It really gives you an idea on where we are and where we're going.
Hey, Dave.
Yep.
Just one question, because Pam will probably be like, what is this? So at what point, we only have 100% of our known contracts, like through 2029, things drop off precipitously. That's just because we don't have contracts in place at this point, right?
Correct. So,
Okay.
What we would do in the past is we would go out for, a gas contract and we would go out for, 3 or 4 years. And so, it would be a rotating piece of the portfolio that you'd have to keep replenishing. We'll still have some gas contracts as we transition. So, we're going to have to do some of those, hopefully more short term than anything. But to your point, yes, the further out we get, the less is contracted. And, I would say in this area where and the other piece that I want to just keep in mind is, we try and keep about 20% open on the market. That's been the goal for years. We don't want to over contract, but we also don't want to under contract. So.
And Dave, how does that you sent out something that E&E had acquired a contract that we potentially would benefit from. Is that part of this projection? This was hydro.
There was a hydro project in Western Mass.
Is it included?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great.
And is that why the line for hydro looks like it goes out a little further, 2031, and it's before it drops off?
Out here,
That's NIPA, right?
This is NIPA, right?
Yeah, NICRA.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why it drops down here. But, what we've been doing, looking at Miller Hydro, for an example, that's one of our contracts. We have continued over the years to extend that the last few times. You guys may recall me mentioning that. So when we can do that, we will. And when that opportunity comes, usually a year in advance or so, we're looking at that.
So I'm looking at the overall percent of renewable energy in our portfolio. You're saying it's around 60%? Is that what you've said?
Non-emitting.
What'd you say, Brian?
It's non-emitting energy. There's a difference in terms between non-emitting and renewable. The wind and solar is renewable. The hydro and nuclear is non-emitting.
Correct.
And that's important terminology.
So I need to understand the overall, a year ago, we looked at these numbers and said Concord was about at 54% renewable energy.
So,
and so I'm looking at this and I can't make sense out of where we were a year ago at 54% and what we are today.
So this is forward electric purchases.
Mm-hmm.
We also purchase RECs to clean up the power supply. And the 54% that you talk about for 2018 was the renewable contracts that we have, plus the renewable energy credits that we bought and retired.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only difference. I don't know, Laura, do you want to add anything to this?
So,
Go ahead, Brian.
so Alice, on the website for the light plant, there is a CMLP carbon-free electricity graphic. I'll share it. Well, actually, no. It restated the 2018 from that 54 to 64%, and it stated 2019 as 62%. The reason being we collected more money, but the rec prices went up, so the percentage stayed roughly around the same. Does that give you an
Yeah, so I
understanding?
did look at that before the meeting, and because the insert to the last light bill had something about our power supply, and I just was trying to reconcile in my own mind what that looked like, because we hadn't had this conversation in the board meeting in quite some time.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure we all understood what our current supplies are and how close we are. Are we making progress on meeting our goals to be carbon free? Yes. Brian.
Yeah, I have a series of my own questions. So the wind contracts are bundled with the recs. So
Correct.
those are renewable. We've stopped. We've retired those. The solar is unbundled because the third party sells the SRECs, and we're using the unbundled recs to offset those so that they are considered renewable in the truest sense. The hydro contracts, most of them are with large hydro. With Miller has two sides to it. There are class 1 recs applied to one turbine, I believe. We are, are the recs from Miller being bundled in, or are they unbundled and we're offsetting with the 1.5 cents we collect?
So you cannot, from this graph, determine what Alice is trying to compute, which is namely the equivalent of the 54%.
Right.
The 54% was the percent of energy of sales for which we had class 1 recs. Okay, it didn't include, and in these, as Brian has started to refer in these different tranches of resource types, some have recs and some don't. So it's not equivalent. You can't translate one graph to the other. And to get to that 54% number is a fairly convoluted process that I don't know if you want to go into right now. Suffice it to say that because of the increase in rec prices, our percentage of renewable as calculated via the 54% methodology, which is namely retirement of class 1 recs, has not increased much. Like
Right.
we haven't gone from 54% to 70%, for
Right.
example. We're stuck in the 50s essentially. And whether the board wants to count class 2 recs, because Miller, as Brian says, comes with some class 1 and some class 2. So do you want to include the class 2s in the calculation of the 54? Or do you want to leave them out? That's I think a more detailed discussion that maybe you could have at another time.
Okay.
So this is the discussion CAB would like to have about the clean energy strategy. So they're seeking this detail. I know John Bolton and a few others have requested this back when we did the climate action plan. So that's why I feel it would be good for this board to participate with CAB in that discussion to get this level of detail on both committees.
So I think this is a community-wide conversation. People in our town are interested in knowing how are we advancing towards our goals of being having a carbon-free electric supply. And if we can't say it simply to people, then we have to figure out how we need to break it down both. So for those who want the detailed information, those who want to understand the big picture, are we getting closer to our goals? How long will it take us to reach our goals? And hold us accountable for developing the policies and the rate structure that will help us meet our goals. That's the role of this board. That's what I see the role of this board to be. So that's why my question was, where are we in this? My last remembering was 54%. We're inching forward. We have quite a ways to go.
I think the big thing is, E&E is looking at all sorts of renewable for us, carbon free, which is what we want, which is where we're going. And, that's a good thing. And then we just have to make sure that we do it properly so that we don't buy too much in certain hours and have stuff that we can't use. And again, E&E's working with us on that as well. So I'm pleased with the progress we're making, and we'll continue to work on that.
And I would add to the properly being that we're being additive to the regional efforts to reduce emissions. That's an important component. Also, sorry, I forgot my second point, but I had it. I think with we keep saying that in 2018, Concord was 54% renewable, which is correct. In the power supply graphic that the light plant has up, it says 64% non-emitting. And I think that 10% delta is the NIPA contract and any kind of, we didn't have nuclear at the time, so it should be just the hydro, the large hydro is that 10% difference. And I want to just clarify that for the audience.
Yeah, and the one.
I'm not sure that clarified it for me yet.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm doing my best to be brief and specific.
So I see the role of this board in generally understanding our power supply to help us and for us to develop the policies and the rate structure that will help us reach our goals for carbon emitting sources. Whether it's a balance between how much nuclear or I leave the details of that to Laura and to Dave and Brian, you obviously can have all those details. But I think from a policymaking board, we have to understand the big picture of this is our goal. We need to raise funds to reach our goal. Do we have the right policies that will help us to reach that goal? And then to have the staff, Dave and Laura and others, report back to us how we are moving forward in reaching our goals.
So I think if I could just make one comment about the big picture, Alice, what you can take away from this chart is that in 2019, a large percentage of our power supply needs were met through market purchases, which are largely fossil based.
Yep.
I mean, that number is close to 60% in 2019 and 2020. It drops to 40% in 2021, and you can see it drop precipitously. At the same time, we've ramped up hydro, wind, some solar, and primarily nuclear to fill a lot of that void. So without getting into the details of the RECs, it's reasonable to say that we're going from roughly 30%, renewable, which is the sum of the yellow, the green, the blue, the purple, and the pink in 2019 to almost 70% by 2025. And that, Brian will argue with the details of that, but I just think from a big picture perspective, this does tell the story that we're moving away from fossil fuels, the gray, and increasing non-emitting resources into the portfolio.
Extremely helpful discussion, Laura. Thank you.
So rather than argue with you, Laura, I actually would add to that and say that if you look back to 2010, when we were 3% non-emitting and no renewable, we've come quite a long way in decarbonizing this energy source. So it's been a great job.
And the one last piece that I want to add to that, the 70% that Laura talked about is a new contract that we're working on right now for more nuclear. So just, that's something that more to come, but we need to make a decision on that by the beginning of December. And, it basically falls in line with the last contract that we did with this 26%. So.
Okay.
So one final comment, Dave, you had mentioned about how we're preparing for the future. I think in-town renewable generation is a big part of the clean energy strategy long term. And energy storage, which you're working on, is enabling us to do other projects for more in-town solar, which is in line with what we're trying to accomplish. So that's good.
Yeah, so I don't want to get derailed completely because we're pretty far behind, but energy storage will be discussed more in the future.
Yep.
And I've been working on that, and you guys know that. So.
Yep, we decided that would be on the December agenda if we can make it. Yep. All right, Pam.
Just very, very quickly, two things. One, process. How do we speak? I mean, do we raise our hands? Do we? That's one. Second, I just want very quickly from Laura, what does landfill mean? I know it's dropping off completely, but what does very quickly? Landfill is the purple line.
Yeah, so that is methane produced from solid waste decomposition.
And you pull that, you capture that?
It's landfill gas.
Yes.
You capture it and you buy it?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a contract. We're not running that facility. So we just buy the electrical output from the facility that is run by somebody else.
Okay, thanks. Got it.
And Pam, for the board conversations, I'm kind of keeping an eye on all of you. And when you raise your hand, I can see that you have a question to raise. As far as participants, I try to keep an eye on the raised hands in the participant column on Zoom and can call on those people at the end of our discussion.
So we're basically honoring the hand raising thing? Because
Yeah.
I'm just seeing, there's a variety of ways people.
Let's try it. I mean, I think that's what we've tried in the past. I think it seems to be working. And if it doesn't, we'll change our process.
Good, okay.
I think Wendy had a comment.
I did. I have a problem.
I saw her hand up.
So Dave, I just had a question. So in the past, we usually had to review and have some comment on new contracts and
Somebody
particularly
get off.
on the nuclear.
Sorry.
It looks like you have an early decision. In December, you're looking for a decision. Do you need any more input from the board on that? We've supported it in the past. I'm just asking.
Yeah, it's essentially the same structure contract. So I really, you guys can chime in on it if you want. You don't have to.
It's an extension of the existing contract. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Gordon.
I just first of all about the process. I've used Zoom enough in social occasions to know that people can really stomp on each other. So if you allow speaking in, then nobody can hear. So I think that raising hands is important just because of the way this tech works. But what I wanted to say was that I have friends and acquaintances in the environmental movement who pay a lot of attention to muni issues. And as a group, they are very, very uneasy with nuclear power. That's not a position that I hold. But, since we represent the town in opinion, that's something we want to keep an eye on. But let me just also say that I think that as a board member, one of the things that I'm very interested in and very concerned about is maintaining the balance, the risk reduction, risk profile to whatever kinds of hazards might be on the horizon, and that having a variety, a portfolio of different sources, each with their own flavor of risk, is a prudent approach, because then these there's no one perfect source. And if you have a bunch of them, they can kind of balance each other out.
A balanced portfolio is what you're suggesting, and I think that's what we currently have. But a good conversation at any board that changes every year with new people joining. Opinions about things like attention to nuclear is something that can be brought up by the board.
Yeah. Just remind the board that the Energy Futures Task Force did say nuclear was okay.
Right.
So that's good.
I saw a hand up from Brian.
Hi. So I'm actually concerned with overweighting nuclear at this point, with 26% going to almost 35%. I don't know the specific price that we're getting it at, but I do know it's a continuous, it's a level contract. So when we have low demand, we're selling that nuclear at the margin. Are we finding value in doing that, Laura?
Overall, the contracts are favorable, Brian. I'm not going to get down into the weeds because that's not what we do, but the contract's favorable. If we want to get carbon free, we have to consider all the sources, and there's only so many things being built out there. So this is a good opportunity.
And we can have a further conversation at a future meeting about the board's opinion about nuclear and the percent that we would choose if we could. But I think at this point, this is not the meeting time or the agenda item to talk about our board opinion on nuclear, but we can bring that up at another meeting.
Well,
we have a very, very full agenda. This was a broad overview of where we are in our renewable component of our general power supply, to bring the board up to date as well as citizens. It's a good conversation to have about our interest and concerns and risk tolerance for nuclear. I'm thinking that I'm looking ahead. It's now 9:05. We said we try to end by 9:20. We still have a number of items on the agenda, including a rate hearing. So I'd like to table the rest of this conversation to another meeting and move along. Do I have agreement on that? I have one thumbs up. Anybody else? I hear no from Brian. Gordon, where are you? Can we use a thumbs up?
We can
Brian,
continue.
sorry, Brian. We're gonna more thumbs up than one thumb down. I think we're moving on to the next agenda item.
You do have one hand raised.
Okay. Let me move it over. Pamela, Drip.
Thank you. And thank you for that chart. That was very fascinating. I would like to know if there's a chart such as that about not what the energy the light plant is purchasing in the future, but what energy the town is using, which would include residential generated solar. Because the amount of energy the town is using is really what we want to get to be sustainable, right? The non-generating. And that's different from the amount the light plant is buying, because it includes stuff the town generates as our own little private power plants, right? And that ought to be visible somewhere, right?
So I think you're asking for some display at some point, the impact of distributed generation throughout town in our power supply. Is that right?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Because otherwise we don't realize we might be making all kinds of good progress.
Okay. I understand the request. Thank you. I see no other hands raised. I think we can move on to the next discussion, which is a discussion that I've asked for the board to take a roll call as a sense of the board. And this is on an analog meter policy. As you recall, we had several requests from citizens to replace a smart meter or I guess it's a smart meter that's on their house with an analog meter, mostly because of concerns for electromagnetic waves or electromagnetic forces, frequency. So Dave, I think Dave needs a policy from the board that says how we'd like to go ahead with providing what the citizens are asking, what some number of citizens are asking for an analog policy. And that will allow Dave to then go forth and make decisions about what to offer and how to do that. So the discussion, I'd like Dave to introduce what he needs from the board to be able to go forward with an analog policy. And I want to make sure I turn your attention to the letters that you should have received in your packet, or maybe subsequent to the packet, from two citizens describing exactly what they're looking for in an analog meter. This is carried on for a little bit longer than we would have liked to have seen happen. The citizens are waiting for a response, and I think now's a good time for us to set the course for moving forward.
Yeah, so really what I'm looking for is, a sense of the board on what you'd like to see here. Do you want a policy drafted by us and approved by the board on allowing analog meters upon request? And if we do that, do we then, charge a fee because we have a truck roll and staff going out to physically read the meters? Other MLPs have done this, and they have a different fee for that because there is a higher expense. And so for us to put a policy together for consideration of the board, I'd like to get a sense on where you guys are with that. And if that's something you'd like to see, then we will put it together. And if then we won't. So I guess that's a real general summary.
So the first part of the conversation is about the sense of the board in providing analog meters for those who choose to have one put on their house. And the implications are that as we move towards time of use rates, these citizens will not be able to participate in the time of use rates that requires that there be a smart meter at the home. Did I frame that in the right way? Was that a hand raise, Wendy, or is that a computer raise?
No, it is, but it's turning my mute on and off.
Okay.
I just want to remind people that with the time of use rate, there was a discussion around not when you opt out, that rate will be high, just FYI.
Right.
Wait a
So
minute.
the time of use
I think
rates is an opt, you have to opt out of time of use rates. It would become the base rate, R1 tariff rate. And so if you don't want to be part of the time of use rate, you can opt out and therefore not have a smart meter. Pam, you had a question?
No, I just didn't hear, there's something, I thought a critical word, but I do, this time of use rate, opt out, would it, and tell me not to talk about it now, but that, will there be conditions under which people can opt out? Or is it just an opt out with check a box thing? And tell me that we can talk about this later.
So I'm thinking that how people opt out would be the next level of discussion. The first level of discussion is, and we will have a rate hearing following this discussion where we will vote on the new set of rates, including a time of use rate. But for this discussion, it's how we will allow, not the process by which people will opt out, but whether we can allow an opt-out strategy. What does it cost the town to install analog meters and to manage them? And so it's giving Dave the guidance that he needs on spending time and energy and finances on researching analog meters. Gordon.
Just reading the letters, it seems like as if the term is non-transmitting, which to my technical mind is different than digital analog. So in other words, you could have a digital meter that is non-emitting if it were perhaps connected.
Can you repeat that terminology for me?
Well, one letter here says requested an analog non-transmitting. So what I'm trying to do here is actually define what it is they're asking. And you know what? They may not know. Or put it another way, I'm not saying individuals don't know, but if we're trying to respond to an anti-smart meter movement here, it may be varied across each of these individuals in terms of what they read and what has caused their concern. So, going back, I thought that the request was that they be hardwired. And it was always, why does it have to be like a truck reading it? Why does it have to go to the pole or over wireless? Why can't you just have a wire going to my house to read the meter? If that's the case, then it implies a capital cost, but it doesn't imply an increased meter reading labor cost. So, I have two concerns: capital costs increase to support this, and increased complexity in terms of operations. And if you have to send somebody out to the house to read it, then now you've got a staffing issue, a scheduling issue, just another management headache.
So two different things, Gordon, right? One with the hardwire, that's the fiber system that will be looked at when we do the RFP for the smart meter project itself. Analog meters are the old style meters that we had, 15 years ago. And the availability of those, we're going to have to figure out if you guys do put a policy that allows that. And then we do have to look into testing equipment to test those meters that, we don't have anymore. So there's a couple things that we need to work out, but I don't want to work through those without guidance on what your thoughts are. And that's really what we're looking for here.
The other thing we could do is we could just say no and let them do whatever it is they want to do next. I won't give them any ideas, but we could just say we've considered this, and this is not in the better interests of ratepayers as a whole. And honestly, the reason why that one of the outcomes, I think favorable outcomes of whatever decision we make here would be to try and choose a path that's going to minimize the amount of attention that we have to give this going forward. It's really been a big distraction over the past year and a half as we've tried to accomplish really important environmental and operational goals. And we've done a lot of that, but we've had to do it against a background of demands that are coming from a tiny minority of what I believe are poorly informed, anti-scientific people that are just really upset. So I don't know how we and even if we do this, I'm not sure that it will satisfy them, because actually what they're trying to do is get everybody in Concord to think the way that they do.
So I think Wendy,
Well,
I thought
I've
Wendy
had my
first.
hand up
Wendy
for-
first. Sorry.
So I guess I just, Gordon raises a good point about what is the true concern? Is it really analog or is it non-emitting? And over the last year and a half, it seems on balance, it is non-emitting, but maybe those individuals who raise the concern could clarify that. Because in our strategy, will we have a technology that's non-emitting? And if we do, then I don't think we have to address this now. That's it.
Brian.
Thank you. So I think the way, because I agree with Gordon in his frustration with this being a distraction throughout the last year and a half. I think you wanted guidance on how the board members feel. I feel that we need to scope out what an analog meter would require and cost, come up with a rate that is similar to 15 years ago there's a cost per kilowatt. There's, someone walks out, reads the meter, and there's no signal coming from that old analog meter. I know you've got to find a way to test them. I know you've got to find a way to source them. But I think this can put this question of what is the opt-out and will it be available and can we do it sooner rather than later to bed? And I think that's important. So that's my thought.
Pam Hill.
I just, I mean, how many people are there? I mean, if this is, like a few people, I would not agree with Brian. I mean, I think that you got to think of the actual cost of doing all of that stuff. I mean, so is this a sizable critical mass or is this a bunch of, just a very few people, in which case I think we have to be very, just think about going down any path like that, because there are costs associated with. So anyway, just I guess to Dave, how many are there? These two letters, or are there hundreds of people who are about to revolt, or what's going on?
I think it's we have what 8,300 customers. It's a small number. I don't know the exact number, but it's I wouldn't say it's more than 100. It's less than that. So it's a small fraction.
What 1% or I don't know what?
Yeah, it's less than that.
I mean, in that case, I mean, I think Gordon, we have to be, I think the less time spent on that and the whole issue while disposing politely of these requests. And I think it may be that we just, say sorry. I don't know. It sounds like it's not worth it.
Because there's a very real risk that we will accommodate their requests and it won't help. Right. That they'll bring it to town meeting and whatever other venues, they'll use our meetings to promote their cause, and all that board time and staff time will just be wasted in order to basically provide fuel for. So look, the other thing is we could ask them, look, if we gave you this, will you please leave us alone? And we might even get a commitment from the ones that are willing to talk to us that would be fine. And then they keep coming back. So if that's the case, then the better source is to just say no. I don't know. I feel very uneasy about this whole thing. I don't have a lot of experience in public policy and dealing with movements like this. It's very frustrating. Sorry, go ahead.
Pam Hill.
I just want to briefly say, I think that sometimes it's kinder to say no if we know what the right policy outcome is. And I, for one, am not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure. And if we know what the right policy outcome is, and we have an argument as to why it doesn't make sense to dispose of scarce resources to pursue this, then we should have the forthrightness and the honesty to say so. So if it's 1% or less, and we have a general view from Dave and others that it's not a wise expenditure of scarce resources, I don't see any harm in responding definitively with a no, and these people want a response, but
So I'm going to take a contrary opinion. Brian, 1 second. You've had a chance. I just want to offer an opinion that's contrary to what I've heard so far. I would probably more be disposed to providing the resources necessary to look into analog meters and to allow the few number of people who have requested them for their homes to have an analog meter installed. I think that there is certainly precedent across the country for other light boards, light plants who have allowed for some opt-out strategy that people can have an analog type meter instead of a smart meter. You're right, the numbers are small, which would then argue that the cost of running that program would also be small. And so if it is such that we can keep our shareholders, remember we are all shareholders in the light plant, happy with the operations of the light plant, then I feel a slight obligation to do that. I also feel that there would be enough data available from other light plants that we wouldn't be starting from ground zero on identifying analog meters or non-EMF emitting meters, that we would jumpstart whatever cost we might have anticipated on researching the available meters and their efficacy. It's been done across the country, so it's not a brand new startup thing for us to do on our own. So I would probably be the lone voice here, it sounds like, in supporting the use of analog meters where they're requested. Brian.
I would fully support exactly what you said. I think that if I had a health concern and I was told, no, you have to put up with this thing that you feel is risking your health, I wouldn't stop. So there has to be an option for these people. And we have a 15-year-old solution that we can revive that may solve their concern and make them happy. It may not get rid of every concern they have, but I feel even though they are a small group, I think we have to create this option. That's my thought.
Pam.
Just quickly, I don't know what the right answer is. One question is, how much would it cost us to get the data necessary to see how whatever we need to know? But I also think broadly that Gordon is raising an important flag, which is that if someone says they have a health concern, we don't just jump, and that gets to measles vaccines and other analogs, where I think the board has an interesting moment here where we have to decide whether, having gathered enough data, we would do as Ryan suggests, because I don't think that just because a very small subset of a community is having health concerns means that a major public policy decision should go in their direction. And I just used the measles analogy. I just don't think it's an important kind of basic question.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, one last thing, if we could get them to agree, if we did this, that they would then stop pursuing us. I mean, you have arbitration clauses when you get a credit card, that kind of thing, that would basically tamp this thing down. Anybody gets a analog meter agrees to stop asking us to whatever.
The difficult public policies is set in that way, but because people move from houses, they change opinions over time. It's difficult to say they'll never raise another objection to a policy of the board. All right, so I'm hearing the board is somewhat split. Let's get a sense. I'm hearing from Brian that you would support allowing limited use of analog meters for those who find it objectionable to have a smart meter. Wendy, what's your sense?
I think we need to research what the cost is and the feasibility of doing it.
I think the cost should be borne by those who want the service. So whatever cost there is should be on them.
Okay. And I think we have Gordon's opinion that we would not move forward with an analog allowance. And Pam, I'm hearing the same from you.
Well, you're hearing what Wendy said, I think, that, if it's cost, more data, if it's costly, but yeah, I think Wendy put it very well. So
the cost, you would support the use of analog meters for for those who choose to have them on their home if they bear the cost of installation and
No,
whatever else of managing
but that was
the data.
Brian's point of view.
Right. I think we need to understand the cost of implementing those analogs.
And the cost of even imposing the burden on Dave and his staff
Right.
to do whatever.
Operational.
The operational expense. Yep.
That's right.
If it's a marginal operational expense to drive a car around to 10 houses, to me feels that's an acceptable expense. If we're talking about 1,000 houses and you're going door to door to read a meter, it's a lot different to me. Brian?
I respectfully disagree with that, Alice.
Okay.
Oh, it gets expensive. Braintree has this thing where they have the opt-out and their charge to read that meter is, they charge about half of what it's costing. It's like $30 a location. And so I just want to put that out there that, I'm going to put a policy together or a draft policy if that's what you guys want to see for review. It doesn't mean it's the last, whatever I present could change, but I think, that's what I'm hearing, that some of you would like to see some costs and potentially a draft policy to look at. That's what I need to know is, are we actually going to do that or not?
So I'm hearing the sense of the board is, yes, we want to see a policy that's put together that allows for research into the analog meters, the cost of operations of the analog non-EMF emitting meters. And then we can, when we know what it would cost to run the program, we can make a determination for a board decision on whether that's a reasonable expense for the light plant to take on. And one proposal was that we include in that the possibility that the homeowners who request this meter pay for the cost of the meters, whatever incremental costs there are associated with it.
Okay.
Pam?
Just very quickly, I would love to know how many towns have been asked these questions and how many have said no. I just would, it's always nice to have a sense of what other groups are doing, but if there's data on that, which you already is pre-existing, I wouldn't mind knowing that. Are there towns where the questions have been put to the town and the town has said no, because it's the costs are not worth the expense, but only if pre-existing data exists.
So question for E&E, I suppose, for them to know how many towns have an opt-out with the costs.
Or Eversource, right? Or the ISOs, the for-profit utilities. Have any of them done it? They probably would wait for legislation.
So I would think that if we're meeting Pam's interest, which is available data, E&E would be able to provide us, I think, with the data for the munis, but it would be a bit more research to figure out what IOUs are doing. Maybe not, but it would it's a bigger endeavor to go to the IOU territory and do that.
Okay. So we understand what you guys are looking for now. That's what I needed. So
okay.
You do have some hands up. If
I just want to point out that I have done an absolutely miserable job of managing this meeting. It is 9:28. We were supposed to end at 9:20 and we've yet to hear a rate hearing. There are 4 hands raised from citizens. Sense of the board, take those comments and move on to the rate hearing and come back to the comments. I need some direction because we are way over time.
I feel the rate hearing may have to be bumped.
No,
I don't think we can. It's rates go into effect January 1. Sorry.
Alice, it seems that my hands up, you're taking questions from the public during the meeting. I'd go to the rate if we've got an urgent business agenda item.
So I understand. I had offered at the beginning of the meeting that we would take comment on each agenda item as it came up. These are a number of citizens who have a particular interest in the analog meters who are here to talk to us about their analog meters. But I am feeling pressure to move forward with the rate hearing and then return to a conversation as time allows. We know a lot of the arguments and discussions because we've heard from citizens at every one of our conversations about analog meters. I would like to hear the comments. We have letters from Gail Heyer and from Courtney Whalen in our files. Those are the ones that were sent to the board in advance. I would like to move on and come back if we have time at the end. Yes, Wendy.
I just want us to do a time check. I have a hard stop. I cannot go beyond 10 o'clock. Just so we're 9:30. So I just think we should
It's
just
at
check.
9:30. I think we need to go to the rate hearing because we have the obligation of the board is to establish rates and policies that follow with the rates. So I hope the citizens understand. I hopefully will be able to get back to your comments on the analog policy. What you heard was a sense of the board that we will develop a policy, look into the cost of implementing the policy, find out what we can about other communities that have already done an opt-out that includes analog or non-emitting meters. So if we have time to get back to these comments, I appreciate you sticking to where we are on the conversation, not starting from ground zero. And you're always welcome to submit follow-up letters or comments to the board.
Alice, I'll just add too that, based on the sense of the board of us putting something together and getting numbers, this discussion is going to continue.
Yeah.
This isn't a one discussion item, so it'll be brought back up again.
Okay. So I'm sorry for those who came just to voice their opinion on this item, but I'm feeling pressure to move to a rates hearing as we have an obligation to establish rates for January 1. So hopefully if we get back to it, that'd be great. If not, please send us your comments and they will be included in the record and we will all review them. Thank you and apologies for running such a terrible meeting and being so late in the planning of, we're way behind. I'm sorry. All right, I think it's time for us to suspend our regular meeting and go into and open up the rate hearing. Do I have a motion to suspend the meeting and move to a rate hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second, Pam. All in favor? Brian?
Aye.
Wendy?
Aye.
Pam?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
Alice, yes. Okay. So we have closed the meeting and this is now the rate hearing portion of our meeting. And I'm going to let Dave start this conversation. Is that
Yep.
okay? Okay.
So Laura's going to go through the tariff sheets on a high level. You guys should have received these on Friday afternoon/evening.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping you had a chance to review them. I know some of you have. We've heard from some of you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura. She's going to go through them. I'm going to drive the PDF that you're looking at here.
Okay, so Dave, would you mind starting with R1?
Yep.
So I'm going to go through each rate. These are the new rates that are being proposed for January 1st. As you all know, these rates were the result of a cost of service study that was conducted by Baker Tilly Virchow Krause in 2020 that calculated our cost of service and how much cost is attributable to each customer class. There was also an element of rate design, which we'll talk about as we go through each rate. I'll point out kind of how these rates are the same and different from the current rates. I'm going to make an overall comment that says that other than the time of use rate, which we'll go over, the rates that are proposed for January 1st are not a huge deviation from the rates currently in place. There are some differences. In general, they're slightly higher, but they're not wildly different. So if we look at the R1 rate, the first difference is the meter charge is going up from $12 per month to $16 per month. The tiers for the capacity and transmission charge have changed. They used to be the first 600, the next 316, and everything above 916. Those are now the first 657, the next 178, and all in excess of 835. The capacity and transmission charges in general have gone down, in part because the meter charge went up, but also the distribution charge went up. So the previous capacity charges were 4.9 cents, 6.3, and 9.1. Those are now 3.7, 4.8, and 6.9. The distribution charge has gone up from 2.8 cents to 4.868, and the energy charge has gone down from 0.07418 to 0.07347. Other than those changes I just discussed, everything else in this tariff is exactly the same as the one that is currently in place. All the verbiage and the other conditions. So what I'm looking for is for an approval by the board to implement the rates as outlined in the sheets that were provided to you. So the first one is the R1 rate. Do you want to do them individually, Alice, or all at the end?
I think we should do them individually, as we may have questions. And I want to point out, for Pam's benefit in particular, the meter charge is what incorporates the fixed costs of the light plant. Is that right? Did I say that correctly?
Yeah,
So-
it's unfortunately, it doesn't cover quite all the fixed costs of the
Right.
light plant, but some of it.
But that's what is meant by a meter charge. It's not actually the meter, but it's all the components of the fixed cost of running the light plant.
Another word for that would be customer charge, the monthly customer charge.
There you go. Thank you.
And for Pam's benefit, these recommendations are consistent with the rate study. that
Correct.
we've already reviewed and given guidance to the team to implement.
Okay, so this is the R1 residential rate. The rate would go into effect January 1st, 2021. And I think if we have heard all comments on this rate, I think we are ready to.
Alice,
Yeah. I'm sorry, I have to figure out how to see multiple things. I have my screen open too. Yep. Okay. I think I see
Gordon?
Gordon. I
Okay,
see
sure.
both Brian and Gordon.
Yep, and I just say one thing is that the meter charge is going up. Solar owners already pay an extra amount just because they own solar, yet they're, in order to cover whatever this meter charge supposedly covers. So at some point, if we keep raising the meter charge, I think we should look at giving solar owners a break. The other thing is, I just want to point out that this is an instance of what you might call a tiered rate, whereas you use more electricity, you pay a higher per volume per kilowatt charge. Okay, that's all I had to say.
I think that's an important comment, and it's something, I have strong opinion on. And I think this is part of balance. This R1 rate is balanced against the R1 time of use rate as well. And we should look at both in tandem. But you're right. This does have a tiered system where the rates are higher for the more electricity you use. And there's a disadvantage for somebody who may have an all-electric home. And we need to address that going forward.
And one
Gordon,
question
yeah.
for Laura is that I believe that the volumetric charges are lower now in correspondence to the higher fixed fee. Is that right?
No,
That's correct.
Yes.
I hear a no from Brian.
that's a primary question. So the per kilowatt hour distribution fee went up by 2 cents. Oh, sorry, yeah, about 2 cents. And the meter charge went up by $4. Both are ways of collecting to cover operational costs of the plant. Why did, when the fixed costs go up, the variable not go down? And is this what in the cost of service study pointed out we need to collect more to operate the plant?
Well, the plant costs are going up annually. Matt can probably give me the exact number, but I think it's probably 2 to 5% a year.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to keep in mind here is the financial statements that we just went over. If you look at them and you read them, you know that we lost over $300,000 in 2019, and we're going to lose money in 2020.
Where are we losing that? Are we losing it in transmission capacity, in energy, or in operations?
It's in a lot of places, and we can go over that separately, but it's an important piece to know that we can't keep operating each year losing money.
I don't disagree with the total rate needs to go up. I just, the idea of raising the fixed fee was to lower the distribution, the variable, so that we could have more consistent funding of the plant through a subscription style rather than a variable, so that the weather in mild winters and mild summers, we didn't under collect and in reverse on those extreme weather years.
I'd also, this is what we've been looking at with Baker Tilly over the last few months. This is what they proposed, right? So what you guys are looking at shouldn't be much of a surprise.
And it indicates just a very small change from last year's rates.
Yeah, Brian, what I'll just point out is the capacity charges are lower. Previously, the capacity charges, as I said, were 4.9 cents, and they're now 3.7. The next tranche was 6.3. That's now 4.8. And the third tranche in the old rates was 9.1 and that's now 6.9. So they have gone down.
Yes, the transmission capacity charges went down, but the distribution charges went up. And I know net, we need to go up for Dave's point about total collection. I just want to make sure those are appropriate to the expenses in the expense groups that we have.
Yeah,
You know,
so Baker Tilly had a certain philosophy. They put a distribution charge of 4.868 cents for every single rate class. So they
Which is-
came up with,
That's good. The same with the energy charge. I love that it's the same in all the rates because it should reflect the same. But I'm just concerned that it's doubled and the meter charge also went up. And I don't see anything that shows that the light plant at 5% increase each year is going to equate to that big of a jump in distribution collection.
So
Well,
I'm going to suggest that this is the result of a year-long cost of service study that the board has been well briefed on. And I think that we should not be getting into a discussion of whether the rate should be 0.036 or 0.034 at this point. I think we trust that the numbers are meeting the needs of the light plan's cash flow and capital expenses, and can argue endlessly about that quarter of a cent or half a cent throughout the rate charges. And so that's my sense. And if we were, every one of these can have that same level of breakdown of discussion about whether these meet the actual cost of the light plant. I personally will say that having spent as much time as we have with the cost of service study and Baker Tilly's analysis and work, and all the work that the staff of the light plant has put into it, particularly Laura, I would say that these rates look pretty darn strong, and I would support our one residential service rate as presented.
I move to accept the rate R1 as presented.
Second,
All in favor? Let's see, Brian,
I'm in favor.
Pam,
I'm abstaining only because I just don't think I know enough, but I'm sure I would have agreed.
we'll have one extension. Wendy,
approve.
Gordon,
Approve.
Alice, approve. 4, let the clerk know or record that it was 4 approve, 1 abstention for learning purposes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
and Dave, could you now go to the residential service rate assistance rider?
Residential rate assistance rider.
Well, that's unchanged.
Is it?
Residential service rate
no.
rider.
There
It's
is a
not.
slight change to it.
Okay, let's do that one.
The change here is that instead of the credit applying to the first 600 kilowatt hours to equate to the old tiers, it now would apply to the first 657 kilowatt hours. It's the same credit of 10 cents a kilowatt hour.
Consistent with the R1 first tier.
Correct.
I
Any
move
discussion?
to, oh, good.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'll just see if there's any discussion on this. If not, let's move to a vote on the rate schedule for the residential service rate assistance
I have
rider.
a quick comment.
Brian,
So I don't want to hold up this rate, but I think long-term, the residential assistance rate should be focused on assisting customers with shared expenses, the distribution fee, charge and the meter charge, and fully crediting those instead of the pass-through costs. That way, the other citizens are supporting the shared expenses, whereas their habits of consumption and when they consume electricity is on them as a customer. And that, I think that would scale better in the long term. But that's a longer term discussion.
that's another discussion.
State it here.
I
Hold on
move,
to your thought. We'll come back to rates again before another rate study. So are we ready for a vote on the rate assistance rider? I think
Yes.
we are. Motion?
I move to approve the residential assistance rider.
Second,
All right, roll call vote. Brian?
Hold on.
Oh, wait.
I just think when you make the motions, Please put in the effective date.
Oh, effective January 1, 2021.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can also refer to the DPU number.
I can't read
Oh.
that on my screen.
It's
Oh, DPU number
449.
449. Okay, thank you. So we have a motion, we have a second, and Gordon,
I approve.
Brian,
I approve.
Pam,
I'm abstaining, I'll get with you sooner or later, but I'm abstaining because I don't.
okay, Wendy,
Approve.
Alice approve. Let the clerk record 4 approve, 1 abstention for learning purposes. Next rate we'd like to take up.
Dave, could you go to the controlled water heating credit rider?
Control credit water heating rider.
This rate is exactly the same number of hours per day of minimum availability. The only difference is an increase in the amount of the monthly credit to be applied to each customer account. The old rate was $14.87. The cost of service study says that the value of that capacity is worth $19.66. So the credit would be increased to that amount.
That's all good news for those that are on our water credit heating.
Yep.
So it shows the value of load control.
It does. Exactly right. Do I have any discussion on this increase in the credit for those users, for those on this rate? I do not see any hands raised. We're ready for a motion? Do I have a motion? And please include the DPU number and the effective date in the stating of the motion.
So I move that we adopt the controlled hot water heater credit rider, effective date of January 1, 2021. DPU number is 382.
No, it's
No,
441.
it's 441.
Oh, it's the replacement, sorry, 441.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote, please. Pam,
Abstain for learning purposes.
Gordon,
Approved.
Wendy,
Approve.
Brian,
Approve.
Alice, approve. Note for the clerk on a vote of 4 approve, 1 abstention for learning purposes.
Okay, Dave, if you could now move to rate R7, the residential service electric resistance and heat pump heating system domestic hot water rate.
R7. R3.
We're there.
Okay, this is exactly the same with the exception of the energy rate. The old rate was 15.431 cents. It would be going to 15.911 cents. This is basically consistent with the change in the R1 rate. This rate schedule is designed to allow all usage on the heat pump meters in the winter to be charged at the lowest tier rate. And since the lowest tier rate's changing from 15 cents to this 15.9, we're be changing this rate schedule as well.
Makes sense. Keep our tariffs in line with one another. Any comments from the board on this rate? I see no comments from the board. Do I have a motion?
I move that we adopt the residential service electrical resistance and heat pump heating system DHW rate, effective date of January 1st, 2021, DPU number 443.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote, please. Wendy,
Approve.
Brian,
Approve.
Gordon,
Approve.
Pam,
Abstain for learning purposes.
Alice, approve. For the purposes of the clerk, 4 to 1. 1 is an abstention for learning purposes. Okay, thank you.
Dave, if you could now move to the residential service off-peak rate R3. This rate is the same as the old rate with the exception of the actual per kWh charge. It would be increasing from 0.07418 to 0.08007, consistent with the results of the cost of service study.
Okay. Any discussion from the board? This is the R3 residential service off-peak rate.
Laura, this little over 8 cents, is that equivalent to the energy charge and the off-peak transmission capacity charge?
It
Or-
is consistent with the energy rate and some contribution towards the, as you said, capacity, transmission, and distribution costs. Yes, that is consistent with the energy usage profile.
So it's 7/10 of a cent towards all of those categories that are not energy.
Yeah, 0.00660 to be exact.
And so we've had discussions before about how the ETS does not pay the distribution fee.
Well, this is actually categorized, the 0.0066 is categorized as a distribution fee. There is no capacity or transmission fee associated with this rate schedule.
Okay.
All right. Yep. Thank you.
Any further discussion of the board before I entertain a motion? I see no hands raised. Do I have a motion? This is the R3 residential service off-peak.
I move that we adopt the residential service off-peak. Is that correct? The R3 rate, effective date January 1st, 2021, DPU number 442.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Wendy second. Thank you. Roll call vote. Let's start on my screen. I see Wendy first.
Approve.
Gordon,
Approve.
Brian.
Nay.
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
Nay. Not approved.
Not approving. Okay. Who was left? Did I get Gordon?
Approved.
Pam?
Abstain for learning purposes.
Alice? Approve. Note for the clerk, there were 3 approvals, 1 nay, and 1 abstention for learning purposes. That vote still carries with a majority of the board.
Okay, Dave, now could you go to G1? Thank you. The changes here, this rate schedule has been adjusted downward to reflect the board's wish to offer a more competitive small general service rate that is consistent with other Massachusetts municipals. If you recall, earlier in the year, we reviewed some data that showed that CMLP's rate for small businesses was disproportionately higher than its other rates relative to the other municipals. So in other words, other municipals offer more attractive small business rates than Concord was. And so we had decided to adjust that. Therefore, this rate is the one rate that's actually going down. The meter charge is going up from $12 to $16, consistent with R1, but the capacity and transmission is being reduced from 8 cents to 3.4 cents. The distribution and energy are consistent with the other rate classes. That this produces an overall rate of about 15.6 cents, which is similar to the tier 1 rate in R1 and about 3 cents lower than what they are paying currently.
Okay, any discussion with the board? I don't think I see any hands raised.
I'm going to share my opinion that I'm very happy to see this rate lowered. This is something that came up in the last 2 cost of service studies, and we're doing it. It's great.
Great. Great that you have the perspective, having gone through 2 other cost of service studies. A few of us on the board have done that. All right, so I'm ready for a motion.
I move that we approve the small general service rate, G1, effective date of January 1st, 2021, DPU number 444.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote. I'll begin with the top of my screen. It's Wendy,
Approve.
Gordon,
Approve.
Brian,
Approve.
Pam,
Same for learning purposes.
Alice, approve. Note for the clerk, there are 4 approvals and 1 abstention for learning purposes.
Okay, G2. The meter fee on this rate is going up from $44 to $50. The demand rate is increasing from $10.85 per kW to $12.40 per kW. But because those are raised, the capacity and transmission is going down from 3.5 cents to 1.7. The distribution charge is going up from 2.6 to 4.9 cents, and the energy charge is consistent with the other rate schedules. So the overall rate here is going from about 14 cents, and it's still about 14 cents. It was 13.576, and it's now 13.915. That's the non-demand portion of the bill.
Okay. Any discussion from the board? And this again is consistent with the Baker Tilly recommendation in the cost of service
Correct.
study.
So I have a question. So the 3-phase was dropped from the rate? There used to be a 3-phase option.
Their G2 customers only can be 3-phase.
Yeah, I don't think there was a,
The old rate had
3-phase.
a single phase and a 3-phase meter charge
For G2?
for
I
G2.
think that was on R1.
Yeah. There's every G2 customer is a 3-phase. There's no way for them to be a single phase customer. So if something was in there in the old piece, Brian, then it really shouldn't have been there.
Well, I'm
Okay.
looking at the last rate schedule that was filed with the DPU, which was 445, and that doesn't mention anything about 3-phase.
I think 3-phase is in a different rate schedule as we saw earlier. Okay.
Sorry, 430.
So
430.
Are we ready for,
Dave, did I hear
motion?
you correctly when you said that G2 has to be 3-phase?
Yeah, they're all 3-phase.
Because it says here in this that it's single phase.
Where are you reading that, Brian?
not be a typo?
I'm on DPU number 445.
Yeah.
Under monthly rate, it says meter charge, single phase, $50 per month.
Oh, you're right. It does
Yeah,
say
so
that.
that should be
3-phase.
taken out.
So that should be 3-phase.
All right.
I don't even think you need to say 3-phase or single phase. I just think you put meter charge.
The G3 says 1 or 3-phase.
So on the website, it says that the monthly meter charge single phase is $44 a month and 3-phase is $60 a month for the G2 rate, the one that this is replacing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think we have any single phase G.
Okay.
So the rates that we are voting on are as presented here. Is there further discussion on these rates?
So is there any way to edit the one we're seeing here to say 3 instead of single?
Single phase. Is that
I would suggest we just take the single phase out altogether and just say meter.
meter charge and, so it does say customers receiving 3-phase service will be assessed 3 times the single phase meter charge as a description on the character of service. You'd have to reconcile the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't we have a motion that acknowledges some minor edits, but as the edits are approved by the board, as stated in the notes.
I think that's a
Thank
good
you,
Okay, I'll
Brian.
make those changes.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Motion, please, if someone is willing.
Sure. I move that the medium general service G2 rate effective January 1st, 2021, DPU number 445 be approved with edits to the phasing phrasing
Second.
Okay, thank you. The roll call vote, please. We'll start with on the top of my screen this time. I don't know why people move around on my screen. Wendy,
Approve.
Gordon,
Approve.
Brian,
Approve.
Pam,
Abstain for learning purposes.
and Alice approve. Note to the clerk, we have a vote of 4 approve, 1 abstention for learning purposes. The next one we're taking up is which rate?
G3.
I have it up.
Okay.
Okay,
So this rate, the customer charge is increasing from $380 per month to $400 per month. Demand fee is increasing from $9.97 per kW to $10.90. The transmission and capacity charge is decreasing from 0.03 cents to 0.0078. You can see that the volumetric rate's getting rather low because we're increasing the fixed charges, and the distribution and energy rates are consistent with the other rate classes.
and again, this was formulated with the help of Baker Tilly and the cost of service study.
Yes.
Any comments from the board before we move to a motion on this? Wendy, I know you have a hard stop. It is now 10 o'clock.
Yeah, no, I made a change, so we'll just keep going. I'm going to drop as soon as we're done voting.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Wendy. I appreciate that.
Might I suggest one change to just to be consistent with what you guys just did on the G2 and just
Yeah.
remove
The single phase.
the single or 3-phase.
Yep. Okay. So the motion should read, included with the edits that were discussed by the board, and it's approved substantially as presented.
You ready for a motion?
I'm ready for a motion. Do I have one?
I move that the board approve the large general service G3 rate effective January 1st, 2021, DPU number 447, with edits to the single phase phrasing within the rate.
Seconded.
Okay, roll call vote. Again, my view has changed. Wendy,
Approve.
let's see who's next. Gordon,
Approved.
Brian,
Approved.
Pam,
Abstain for learning purposes.
Alice, approve. Note to the clerk, we have a vote of 4 approvals, 1 abstention for learning purposes. Next,
Okay.
Tara.
Do you want to go over the PCA, Dave?
I don't think I have the PCA in this particular.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
I didn't see PCA.
But because it wasn't ready on Friday, but we do have it available now. How about if I just tell
We can
you
talk. Yeah.
what the change is here? This rate schedule merely points out the amount that is assumed to be in rates to cover power costs. So that rate was 11.25 cents previously, and based on the cost of service study adjustments, the new assumed cost of power supply embedded in rates is 0.11317 per kWh. And it's pretty much an accounting thing. Matt will then use this number to compare what we actually spend for power against this 11.317 cents. And to the extent we spend less, we'll owe the customers the money back. And to the extent we spend more, the customers will owe us. It's an accounting mechanism, essentially.
And we did discuss this earlier when we looked at the management, our 2019 audit review.
And just to be transparent, if we were going to implement a PCA on the bills, that would come to the board for a vote. We wouldn't just do it. It requires a board vote, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion from the board on this one? I see no hands raised. Ready for a motion? Does somebody have a motion for me?
I make a motion that we approve the change in the PCA rate from 0.1125 to 0.11317 per kilowatt hour.
Okay. Do I have a second? Someone, please second.
Sure. I'll second.
Brian second. Okay, roll call vote. I will start this time with Gordon,
Approved.
Pam,
Abstain for learning purposes.
Brian,
I'm going to abstain because I had no background.
Okay, Wendy?
Approve.
And I approve. So that's 3 approvals, 2 abstentions for learning purposes on this one as well. Brian's in the same category on the PCA, so thank you. What's our next one?
Okay, the last one, I believe, Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this should be the residential time of use.
Yes.
Oh, no, there is one other. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's the general service ETS.
Yeah.
And that one is exactly the same as the residential. It's 0.0. Sorry,
0.08007.
007. Correct. It's just that it's for general service customers rather than residential, but otherwise it's
okay.
the same.
Okay. Do we have a discussion on this item? I do not see any. Oh,
Sorry, the same discussion point as the other ETS rate, which is that I feel it's under collecting on the cost to distribute power.
okay. Note as a comment in our minutes. So I see no other comments. Are we ready to for a motion on this one? I think we are. Who can make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the general service off-peak ETS heating effective January 1st, 2021, consistent with DPU filing number 446.
Effective January 21?
Yes, effective.
January 1st, 2021. Okay.
Yes.
And a second?
Aye.
Gordon will second. All right. So let's take a roll call vote. Go on my screen again. Wendy?
Approve.
Brian?
Decline.
Pam?
Abstain for learning purposes.
Gordon?
Approve.
Alice? Approve. For the clerk's purpose, we have 3 approve, 1 abstention for learning purposes, and 1 nay vote. Okay.
Okay, the last rate schedule is the residential time of use. This is the one exception that I said there were a number of structural changes to this rate, which is why I've left it for last. The meter charge would be going up from $12 to $16, consistent with the R1 rate. One of the big differences here is the introduction of a demand rate, which you may have just noticed on the G2 and G3 rates. CMLP already has demand rates for those commercial classes, but not for residential customers. Baker Tilly's recommendation, a strong recommendation, was that this rate schedule come with a demand rate. They felt it was appropriate. It's consistent with what other MLPs are doing, and it's their recommendation. I asked them to not make it a large number because people aren't used to the idea, and I felt it would be a shock to customers. And so we started off with this very modest $1 per kW. As an example, somebody's peak, people are different, obviously, but a peak number might be 5 kW per month for one or 8 for another. So you're talking about, $5 to $8 a month in some cases. There may be folks out there who are charging Teslas at 20 kW. And if that's the case, they would be hit with an incremental $20 per month charge based on this introduction of the demand rate. So that's one big difference. And then the definition of peak and off peak is changing. It used to be 10 p.m. to noon on weekdays and all day on the weekend. And we're now talking about changing that to have 2 time periods again in the winter, which would be longer. Instead of 10 p.m. to noon, off peak would now be, and Dave, if you could bring up, I just sent you an email with a PowerPoint in it. The second slide has a graphic I think would be useful that if folks could look at.
Okay. Give me a
I
second.
also made a graphic I'd like to share.
So basically off peak now in the non-summer months, which is October through May, instead of being 10 p.m. to noon, it would actually be 8 p.m. to 4 p.m. So all but 4 hours of the day would be considered off peak in the winter. And then the 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. period would be considered peak. So that's sort of a benefit to time of use customers because we're extending the off-peak period considerably. The summer is a little different. Rather than having 2 time periods, it would actually have 3. The peak would still be 4 to 8 p.m. for consistency's sake. People always know the peak happens from 4 to 8, no matter what time of year it is. But now the other hours are broken off into what we're going to call a mid-peak and an off-peak. The mid-peak is from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. The rates aren't nearly as high as the peak period, but they're not quite as cheap as the super off-peak, which is 8 p.m. To 8 a.m. So you get a super off-peak from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., a mid-peak from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and then a peak from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And here's the little graphic that kind of shows you by season what the different time periods are. The overall rate previously on peak was 22.5 cents and off peak was about 11 cents. And that would be changing to, in the winter, 19 and 13 roughly for the on and off peak. And in the summer, the on peak would be 33 cents, the mid peak would be 19, and the off peak would be 12. So those are the big changes here proposed for this. Currently, CMLP has about 44 customers on the existing time of use rate that would be transitioned to this rate. Carol Hilton and I have been working on customer correspondence to make them aware of the changes to the rate. And I've also been doing an analysis for each one of the customers that are on a whole house time of use as opposed to an EV time of use to help them determine whether or not they'll be paying more or less under this rate than they would under R1. So we'll individually coach them on which rate would be more favorable for them.
Brian.
So Laura, on the graphic that was shown, I think there's an error in the graphic.
Okay.
So in the rate schedule, it says that mid-peak is 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. to midnight. So I think that very top little box for summer should be mid-peak rather than off-peak.
Well, that also corresponds with the language in the tariff, which I also don't understand, where it says the off-peak hours per day is June through September is 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. And I think we just said it was from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Okay, so
under billing period, it's written differently.
Could we maybe just put this off until next month? I have a lot to digest here.
And I'd like to make some comments before we put that off, because I know we're under a time crunch.
What is the sense of, with Dave and Laura, what do you need for January 1? Can this wait until December 9th vote on this particular tariff?
No, we won't have time to get it implemented appropriately.
So you need a vote today.
Yeah.
Otherwise
the time of use rate will stay the same. So that's the issue.
Well, I don't know that we can do that actually, Dave, because then they won't be paying cost of service and everybody else will.
Right, and so it's rates.
So we need a vote today to be equitable across all rate classes.
So you're right, Brian, the chart is incorrect. I believe the tariff language is correct.
The tariff language is correct. That says that the off peak is midnight to 8 a.m.
in the summer months. So under billing periods, Alice, it says in the winter months, there are 20 off-peak hours from 8 p.m. to 4 p.m. In the summer, the off-peak would be 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. and all weekend. The mid-peak would be 8 to 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. And the peak would be the same 4 to 8. Does that make sense?
I understand where that comes from, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for somebody who's trying to run a household. That if we're asking that the off-peak hours from midnight to 8 a.m. be the time that you can preset your dishwasher, say, to wash off peak hours, that's great. charging your vehicle would also work just fine. 8 hours from midnight to 8 a.m. would work. But for other home appliances that are not programmable, that may be a hardship for a lot of people to do, say, doing laundry.
Well, it's not that they can't do the laundry and they won't be
pay
paying
more.
a peak price. They'd be paying a mid-peak price, which is only modestly higher than the super off-peak price, right? It's 18.7 cents versus 13.3. It's not 33 cents.
It's almost the average price. Do you mind if I share? I apologize for sharing while you were talking about the language, but do you mind if I share that graphic one more time and explain?
What is it? What graphic are you suggesting?
The one
I
that
want
I
to
have.
understand what you're saying.
The graphic that shows load versus this time of use structure.
I don't think I understand what you're asking.
Can I share it?
Can you tell us what this is so I understand
Yes.
that will need a lot of explanation for me. I don't understand that.
Okay. So
And what is the value in terms of understanding the rate charge that we're trying to vote on a tariff?
correct, because the point of this time of use rate is to match it with load, and this will explain how it does match with load. So the blue here is the price for each kilowatt hour during the different hours of the week. And in black here is the 2018 load for the summer. And you'll see how this mid-peak matches up very well with this inflated peak that happens during the summer as the average load rises. And you'll see here that it also matches very well with this off-peak time. And if I go to, here's the winter rates for the other 8 months of the year. You can see that they don't peak as high, and thus we don't have to have as many on and off peaks. And I also want to point out that there's been a lot of concern about time of use. People see the 33 cents for the for this few hours here, and they think, oh, I've got a heat pump. I want to run it throughout the day. Think of that as the average price here of the 17 cents. So that's what I want to explain, and thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, Brian, it looks like we coordinated, but we didn't. I just did a really good job of designing the rates.
You did, you did, and it was great to read it in the rate schedule.
And I just want to make sure that those who are watching or if you watch this recording sometime in the future, the idea here is that we are incentivizing off-use use of energy as a way to shave our peak from the highest cost hours when we pay the most for energy. So that what this is a way of managing the energy flows and hopefully bring down the highest cost of our energy during those peak hours. So you incentivize the use when it's more available and less expensive energy to use.
I have two more points to make. I have two more points to make on this rate schedule. One is the demand rate. I am, let's say, vehemently opposed to putting a demand charge on residents. Back when we did the tiered pricing in 2009, we're still dealing with trying to get rid of that. This is just seeding another problem for that in the future. Electric vehicles, you know, as Laura pointed out, have a very high demand, but it's very incoincident to when our charges and expenses are created. So I feel demand charges for a resident are an antiquated way to do this. The other point I'd make on this rate is the energy and transmission capacity should be a credit if there is a net export for solar customers, because otherwise no solar customer can go on this rate. And the majority of people who want to use it are those solar customers. So I feel that there has to be a credit valued at the value of that energy at that hour, which would be a credit for the energy charge and capacity charge during the hour of export.
Personally, I didn't understand that distinction. Hopefully, Laura, can you help?
Yeah, so his first point is he doesn't like the demand charge.
I got
And
that.
but I just want to make a point about that. So this dollar, so you have to make a distinction, Brian, between the costs we incur due to capacity and transmission, which happened during the coincident peak. This billing demand that we're talking about imposing upon residential customers will be based on the non-coincident peak. And what that means is that regardless of when the customer used the most amount of energy, we record that. So if you charge your Tesla at night and you use 20 kW, you get charged for 20 kW, whether it was at midnight or 6 p.m. in the evening. And Brian doesn't like that. But the point is here that it's $1 per kW. If we were trying to recoup capacity and transmission costs, Brian, we'd be talking like $10 to $15 a kW. This dollar per kW really reflects just that portion of the distribution system that has been sized to accommodate that 20 kW Tesla. A customer that wants to charge at 20 kW needs more infrastructure than one that wants to charge at 2 kW.
Right. So at our last meeting last month, I asked for the amperage to be used so that we would have a fixed charge based on the home's amperage connection to the distribution system instead of a demand fee. I think that is a fairer way to allocate those costs, but I still have not heard what those what the amperage connections are to the distribution system for different types of customers, how many customers fall into each of those categories. So I'm unable to move that forward.
Well, Dave, we don't actually know the amperage for every single one of our 8,300 customers, do we?
No, we don't. But I would say, going with the concept that Brian talked about, I understand it, but it's also problematic because we have customers that have a 200, a 320 or 400 amp service that don't use much electricity at all based on their needs. So
that's me.
And I'm not throw out the solar customers aside, we have customers that are non-solar that still don't use a lot but have a large electric service. So it's a tricky way to do it for sure.
And then on your second point, Brian, at this point in time, this rate schedule that we're proposing for January 1st, 2021 would not be available to solar customers. People who want to net meter would still need to use the residential net metering rate, which is not changing from its existing tariff. I hear what you're saying, and I would like to move in that direction as well, where customers could take advantage of the time of use, and we'd have to figure out the crediting of the excess hours. In order not to pay solar customers the retail rate for complete excess production over the month, Brian, we can't just credit them the exact tariff rate. We're going to have some netting mechanism like we do today, where you can get credit at the retail rate up to the point of export. And as we look at doing that in tranches of time, we'd have to create some kind of rollover mechanism, which would say, okay, you get credited the retail rate up to the point where you're surplus on the peak hours, and then those excess hours roll over to mid, and then those excess hours roll over to off, and then anything excess to that gets credited at the day ahead rate.
Yeah, I would avoid the day ahead rate, and I would just simply credit, cash it out immediately with the credit for transmission and energy, and continue to collect the fixed meter charge and collect the distribution on any energy sent to the home.
I'm not sure, we can't pay.
Wait,
retail.
we're not supposed to be talking about
Okay.
net metering
All
right
right.
now.
All right.
Thank you.
That's true. Thank you. That's helpful.
And the other thing is I just, back to that comment that I made on the first sheet we looked at, which was residential has tiers, right? Now this is another residential, it's the new residential, it's the tour residential. It is untiered. And Brian just professed his disapproval of tiered rates. But I think that that's a big step. Moving away from tiered rates gives the largest users a windfall of potentially hundreds of dollars a month. And I'm just, and the distribute the what did you call it? The demand rate.
Demand charge. Demand rate.
Demand charge would hit them, but not by anywhere near. It'd be like a factor of 10 smaller. So we this is, if we roll this out as the next kind of service that we're offering, that we're asking residents to go with, then we are drastically changing at least the capacity and transmission charges, distributing them and moving them from one group of customers to another. That's my perception. I know that we've been talking about this. There are good reasons for trying to lower the distribution piece from the volume and move towards a fix. They include more regular budgeting on a annual basis that won't depend on the weather as much. But I just feel uncomfortable about making a change that is potentially going to increase the rates for the smallest users without really being careful about it. I may be losing this argument. I've heard, but I don't know. I just really am really. But the other thing is that what we're really talking about here with this R1 tour rate is really, this is mostly used by EV owners. Isn't that right?
But sorry.
Currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we just, I don't know if it helps to think of it this way, is that this is an incremental step that affects mainly users and shouldn't, I don't want to accept the fact that, for instance, this residential tariff, if this represents the future, is not cognitive. It doesn't take into account net metering. I'm not ready to do that. So as long as we view this as a small adjustment that's mainly intended to affect people that are charging their cars, then the risk in my mind of making major changes is smaller.
I disagree, Gordon. I don't think this is a small change. I don't think this is just going to affect EV drivers. This is our pilot for a time of use default rate. This is big.
Okay, and we're doing it at 10:30 on a meeting that was supposed to end at 9:30. Back to my original thing that I think that we've run out of time on this. I know, and the idea of being equitable across all ratepayers, I don't think that applies here because not that many people are on this yet. They're mostly currently EV users. I think that as a board member, I should have the ability to ask for time. I haven't digested this.
All right, Dave and Laura need to understand, if we do not vote on this tariff today, can we move ahead with the other tariffs as stated and come back to this at a different point?
It'd be subject to rate discrimination because we adjusted all the other rates based on the cost of service study that we've been working on for over a year. And so if we don't do all of them, it's subject to rate discrimination.
So then I have a problem here with the board and I need to understand how we can move forward. I'm hearing some strong objections to the rate as it is here. I also hear that we can't move ahead with all the other rate decisions that we made without a time of use rate.
Then I move to rescind all of the approvals we've made so far.
No,
I cannot be, listen, you were telling me that I don't have a choice, right? And you can't say that. I do have a choice. You're
With
taking away my
With
Okay.
respect, Gordon, we have been talking about this for the last 6 months at least. And these numbers have not changed from what Baker Tilly presented with some modifications to the hours. So, I mean, and this is not an entirely new concept. We have been hashing and rehashing this stuff. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a choice. I'm just saying this is not entirely new material.
Can I offer another potential solution? The existing time of use rate, can it be modified to keep the old structure, but modify it to be in line with the other approvals we've done today?
I think if we were to take out the demand rate, that would be closer, but we also just added a mid-peak, which we didn't have before. And you've made a strong argument of why there's a mid-peak with your graphics.
And I love the mid-peak. I want to defer this so that we are, because I also feel I'm boxed into a corner as this is my second meeting actually being a member. And only being able to talk from the audience. The old rate has an on-peak of 14.6 cents and an off-peak of 3 cents and something, and then an energy charge that is the previous almost 8 cent energy charge. Can we adjust those numbers to be in line with other approvals, Laura?
I'll have to go back to Baker Tilly and ask them to rerun those numbers.
Is it, are we able to, as a board, approve that concept in the rate schedule without a drafted schedule in front of us?
No.
Wendy is saying no.
Yeah.
I'm assuming not, and I want to see it. I don't want to vote on anything we can't see.
Yeah, Alice, may I ask?
Yes, please.
I'm hearing that there's urgency from and you know, recognizable urgency from Dave, and also that paralysis on the board. Could there be a meeting scheduled for next week?
Yeah, I was going to vote the same.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's the only solution that we would have.
Right.
Is to, I don't know, Laura, are you able to put together a new tariff sheet that the board could meet next week to vote on the tariff that would be in keeping with the rest of the tariffs and the Baker Tilly study, but meets the needs of the board?
So you want to look at that, Alice, as opposed to having another meeting to discuss whether this new structure is appropriate?
I think if we ask whether the new structure is appropriate, we go back, we have to call into question all the other votes and all the other rates that we put together because they're tied together.
So can we get a clear statement about what the objection is to this rate? I heard the demand rate, but then I heard what else specifically?
that we're losing tiers, and maybe I need to talk with somebody who knows more about this stuff than I do. Why it is that it's time to finally put away tiers, and I'm uncomfortable with that, and I'm also uncomfortable. Well, okay, maybe I lost the fight when we approved this, when you guys went out and got this rate study. So you guys wanted to get rid of tiered rates. So the way to do it is get a rate study, write the study, sign it, and now a board member has no choice but to get rid of tiered rates. And that's the way it works.
So
This is not moving.
Gordon, this is a strong opinion of yours that you've had throughout the entire year while I was coming up to speed on the light plant, that the idea of tiered rates, you have a very strong opinion about the volumetric design of rates. And I have a slightly different view of the same thing, which is as we move towards all electrification of buildings, our energy use across the board will be, our electric rates will be, or electric use will be going much higher as people move to electrifying. And therefore you create a disincentive to meet our climate goals if you charge more for houses or businesses that choose to go all electric. And so that same tiered rate is a disincentive as we move forward to meeting our climate goals. So you and I have disagreed on, I understand wanting to protect the smallest users. I also understand and want to meet our climate goals. And I don't see how we can do both of those with a volumetric only design.
And Gordon, to add to that, I'd rather protect our smaller users through the residential assistance rider rather than through the R1 rate structure. But we're talking about the time of use R1.
But that it's relevant because Gordon sees that the tiered structure of the time of use rate is gone. And that's something that he feels strongly about as a volumetric design of the rate. So it is a bigger discussion.
Also that it doesn't play nicely with net metering. So to me, have we really thought about that?
Yeah.
So
back in March.
It is now 10:33. I think rather than try and debate this further, I think we have to decide on a process going forward. I think that there's a lot of discussion to be had about tiered rates and not tiered rates. I understand that we need to vote on a package of tariffs that work together for January 2021. And I don't see a resolution even in the next week on the bigger issues of tiered rates and a package of new tariffs that help us get to our climate goals and our new rate structure of having demand charges and whatever. So
maybe what you need to do is pass this over my objection. But I just do think that there's some pieces that haven't been put together yet, and that's all. So go ahead and pass it over my objection.
I find that difficult to do because it's a very strong and passionate plea. And so what I'd like to do is I think that we need to look at this rate, find the major points of adjustment that needs to happen, propose a rate and have a meeting next week to see if we can vote on a rate that would complete a whole package of new rate structures, understanding this would be the new time of use rate, considerably different than the last one. Brian.
I would like to propose that the old rate be updated to be in line with those approved today for a meeting a week from now, and that meeting a week from now, we can have a discussion about time of use, this time of use rate. In that way we can, because we're not going to resolve my concerns about credits and the demand charge and Gordon's tiered concerns in a week.
So the question for
And
Laura is.
Also, I am extremely busy right now. So I have a project that's due the day after Thanksgiving weekend. And so anyway,
So
for what that's worth.
are you able to meet next week if we had a new rate schedule to review for residential time of use? That's an updating of our current time of use rate schedule that takes into account some of the Baker Tilly recommendations. Are you able to meet next week if we had a 1 hour no longer meeting? Or could we do it in 1 hour, half an hour, 1 hour?
And honestly, it might be better for me just to pass it over. Okay, all right, sure. If you guys are willing to do that, and I appreciate the attention that the board members are giving this and the public too. So I'm sorry for not being up, completely ready to do this. I apologize for asking for more time for you guys. And I'll point out that it's coming at a considerable cost to myself. I was supposed to be in Boston at 10:30 this morning, and it's been tough.
Yeah. I appreciate you having stayed longer. I take full responsibility for this meeting having run over so long. I guess I poorly designed the number of items I thought we could discuss in a meeting and underestimated the amount of engagement that the board would have on these items.
Alice, don't apologize.
Well, it's an hour past, an hour and 10 minutes beyond where we're supposed to be. So I'm trying to move forward.
You're doing the best you can.
So
thank you, Alice.
So the question is whether Laura is able to put together a new tariff that is an upgrade to our current time of use strategy in keeping with some of the Baker Tilly items in concern and meets the concerns about a demand charge and tiered rates. Is there something?
I've got to go back to Baker Tilly. The project is technically over. We've made our final payment, but I think that I can get their help in doing this.
Okay. So can we schedule a meeting for next week?
As far as I'm concerned, yes.
Yeah.
Wednesday works for me.
What day works for you, Laura? I'm going to ask Laura because she's got to work with Baker Tilly and present and send out.
I think Monday would be inadvisable, so I would suggest either Tuesday or Wednesday.
Would Wednesday give you a little breathing room?
Yes.
So can we suggest on Wednesday morning?
Yep.
Wednesday morning. I'm available at 7:30. Others?
I'm available.
Pam?
I'm available.
I'm available.
I'm available.
Okay, 7:30, Wednesday, November 25th. And we'll continue this discussion, hopefully be able to make a decision about this time of use rate tariff for the coming year.
And then
Okay.
can I just ask one additional question? So the concern over volume metrics is going to hurt the smaller customer. So on the current rate tariff, is there some kind of information we can have about what that variation is in the size of those customers? To address,
How
so
many
Gordon's
there are?
sorry.
You want to
How
know
many?
how many
No, I just
customers?
want to understand what the impact is on the small customer. If that's the problem, that concern around volumetrics is going to impact the smaller customer. So what is the range of our customers that are under this rate today? And what would that impact be? Under this?
question.
So Wendy, do you need that for next week's meeting or for the further meeting when we discuss changing the time of use? Or is that going to be done at next week's meeting?
Well, I guess I'm hearing the concern from Gordon. So I'm really in support of this rate as it is, but I want to understand the concern that Gordon has that this is going to negatively influence those small customers. So I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. So we're going to look at a different rate, but I don't know how that's going to differ from how it's going to hit current customers under the current rate.
And honestly, also isn't this a landfall, right? A windfall. Yeah, for the largest, which is, I think that we have some people that have been following meetings that are very passionately in support of lowering the costs for the highest users. So there's a philosophical question here too. So a part of the thing too is higher energy costs do encourage certain actions. They encourage higher energy costs, promote conservation, and they also promote solar. So, that's in conflict a bit with beneficial electrification. So there's a balance that we're trying to make here, and it's philosophical. The one thing I feel, and it's very difficult in my mind to balance those, it's a calculation, which is, I'll respect anybody who has a different calculation. You're entitled to your views. But the one, I think, explicit thing that I continually point to is it would have an effect on the lowest payers. So,
and it will disincentivize people to use too. So I think that's a concern.
Right.
So I am concerned with that, but
yeah, we're trying to
I'm
balance
concerned
those.
that the demand charge will disincentivize people to switch to electric vehicles because they'll be hit with a demand charge when they charge their car in the middle of the night. There's many issues, but we need to have.
So I'm hearing the new rate charge, the new rate that we hope that Laura will be able to reconcile with Baker Tilly is to not have a demand charge in that rate schedule and to identify whether a tiered rate structure will work or not, and see if we can have a rate that we can approve. I think it's important for us to have a rate that we can approve so that we can move ahead with all the other rates and start moving in the direction that we want to be of being able to have fixed charges and energy costs. And it's a conundrum. There are many political questions and philosophical questions for us to grapple with over the coming year. And I think the idea of a volumetric design is one that we should talk about. I think I circulated him an email from David Allen that talked about the pros and cons of volumetric design, and it's probably worth taking a look at as for some future time when we have a discussion about the philosophies behind that.
Yep.
So if Laura thinks she can do it by Wednesday morning of next week, let's see if we can get there. We'll meet again at 7:30 on Wednesday morning.
Okay, sorry guys.
That's fine. It's good to have a good conversation, robust, and keeps people engaged. Unfortunately, we are way over time. No more time for our 2021 rates discussion. Any liaison from the board, other conversations.
Do we need to close the rate hearing?
We do need to close the rate hearing. So I need
Oh, wait, hold it.
wait,
Actually, you can't close a rate hearing without asking for public input. That's because it's a hearing, not a, it's a
we
hearing.
were voting and hearing.
there is one hand raised. Gail, two hands. Gail Heyer. Gail,
Gail, I think you're muted.
and I can't unmute. Gail, are you able to unmute?
David, can you unmute her?
No, I can't.
Well,
there
oh
it
wait,
is. Gail's
I think
on.
she's got it.
Oops, now she's off. Try again.
We can move on to Pamela Dritt while Gail's trying to unmute so we can move things along. If that's okay with you, Gail, we'll move to Pam. Pamela Dritt.
I just want to say that we've hit the problem where we want to incentivize electric use, but discourage fossil fuel sources of it. Can we make a fossil fuel a different rate for all electric homes, including solar, than from homes that have fossil fuel? Because we do need to keep the higher cost on huge users when they've got McMansions with oil or gas utilities.
Okay, thank you. Gail, were you able to unmute? I do not see Gail able to unmute. Perhaps, Gail, you would be able to send us your comments and we will consider them before and as we develop the rate for the time of use rate. I'm sorry that we're unable to hear you. Oh wait, are you able to? No.
No.
So I appreciate you submitting your comments so that we can include whatever you have in mind to our discussion on the rates. Thank you. Now I can take a motion to close the hearing.
So
I
moved.
move-
Second?
Aye.
Second.
Okay, let's have a vote of the board. Gordon,
Aye.
Brian,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
Wendy,
Aye.
Alice, aye. The rate hearing is closed. Now we are ready to close the meeting as well. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Pam. All in favor? Gordon,
Aye.
Brian,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
Wendy,
Aye.
Alice, aye. We are adjourned.
All
See you
right.
all next Wednesday
Thank you.
morning at 7:30.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much.
I know.
Bye.
Bye-bye.